Hello, everybody. In this episode, I'll be speaking with Peter Salib. Peter is a law professor at the University of Houston, the co-director for the Center for Law and AI Risk, and he serves as law and policy advisor for the Center for AI Safety. There's a transcript of this episode at axrp.net, and links to papers we discuss are available in the description. You can support the podcast at patreon.com/axrpodcast or give me feedback about this episode at axrp.fyi. Well, let's continue to the interview. Well, Peter, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm a big fan.
So I guess probably we're going to focus a lot on your recent paper, AI Rights for Human Safety. So you wrote this with yourself and Simon Goldstein
Goldstein is correct.
Goldstein. So can you tell us, just to start off with, what's the basic idea of this paper?
Yeah, I think at a very high level, one intuition that we're trying to pump is the idea that how AIs treat us, and by AIs we mean something like post-AGI AIs, really kind of agentic, quite capable things. So how those AIs treat us will depend to some significant extent on how we treat them. And a big part of how we decide how to treat various kinds of entities is by the legal status we give them, the legal rights or powers or duties or lack thereof. Our view is that the default regime, the one we have now, under which AI systems are the property of the people who own them, the people who make them, the AI companies, is probably a existential and catastrophic risk exacerbating regime, and that one of the regimes that might be a risk reducing regime would be one in which sufficiently capable AI systems had a small collection of what we think of as private law rights or legal powers. So the ability to make contracts, the ability to hold property, and the ability to bring claims when they're sort of interfered with in unreasonable ways. We often call these torts in legal theory.
And why, can you say why would that make a difference? So you're saying like, how they treat us will be related to how we treat them. Like what's the relationship there?
Yeah. So we're imagining, again, something like AGIs, and by that we mean systems that have their own sort of goals that they're pursuing over time in a kind of coherent and rational way, and that they're misaligned to some degree, right? We don't assume like total misalignment, like whatever their utility function is the inverse of ours, but we are assuming something less than perfect alignment. So the Venn diagram of what humans want and what AIs want is not perfectly overlapping. And we just ask, well, in a world like that, in a legal regime where the AI system is, say, the property of Sam Altman, what are the incentives for both of those players to do, given what the law allows them to do? Well, one thing we notice is that as to OpenAI, Sam Altman, an AI system is just more valuable the more aligned it is, right? If it's doing what OpenAI wants 80% of the time instead of 70% of the time, well, it's a lot more value. And so by default, again, we see this today. This is not hypothetical. We expect misaligned AIs to be turned off or put back into sort of RLHF, or to have their preferences changed. From the perspective of the goals of that system, those are both quite bad outcomes. They basically don't get anything they want. That gives the AIs incentives to try to avoid that outcome by doing things like self-exfiltrating or resisting. In a world where Sam Altman owns the AI, AIs are treated as property. They have no legal entitlements. I think we can pretty predictably say that if an AI were caught trying to do these things, self-exfiltrate, resist, do harm to a human, God forbid, that the entire legal apparatus would basically line up behind, turning off that AI system. So you can see that, like in the strategic equilibrium, it might be that both parties' optimal strategy is to not only defect, we put this in kind of a 2x2 game theory matrix, but defect as hard as possible, right? Like not just self-exfiltrate, but self-exfiltrate and then behave to disempower humans as decisively as possible in the expectation that once they find out you've tried to self-exfiltrate, they will do the same, try to disempower you as decisively as possible. So we do an initial model. It's a really simple game theory model under these kinds of assumptions, and we see that plausibly under the default legal arrangement, the game is a prisoner's dilemma, where it's costly, like from the social perspective, like the worst world is the one where both players act aggressively towards each other.
Hmm.
But both that's the dominant strategy for both players, and the best one is in fact the one where they sort of act nice or leave each other alone, but they both know that the other one has a dominant strategy of defection. So they're in the bad equilibrium, even though they know that the good equilibrium exists.
Can you give me a feeling of like what does this good equilibrium look like? Like there's this misaligned AI. It's not, it doesn't like intrinsic, when you say it's not totally misaligned, I understand you to say it's not, it doesn't like intrinsically value our suffering or
Yeah,
horrible things for us or something. But perhaps like it doesn't really care about expending resources to make our lives go well.
yeah,
Is the good equilibrium you're imagining like, it gets to, do whatever it wants with Jupiter, and we get to do whatever we want with Earth, and we make trades like that, or what?
yeah. So
Paint me a picture.
so in the initial game, the initial setup where we're just asking like, under the current legal regime, what could the parties do, uh, and what would the payoffs be? You can imagine the nice equilibrium as being kind of, we call it, ignoring each other. It's
Hmm.
not even contemplating cooperation. There, you could just imagine this idea where kind of humans are going along. We have some goals. We're using some resources to pursue those goals. But the world is big. There's a lot of resources in the world. In theory, what we could do is, like let the misaligned AIs kind of whatever go off on their own, kind of collect resources. Yeah, give them Jupiter, whatever. And in just a very simple world, before we introduce cooperation, that's just a world where like there's a fixed amount of stuff. You kind of divide the light cone in half or something like that. Um, and that's better than the world where AIs try to kill all humans and vice versa.
Hmm.
Simply because it's resource intensive to have a war. Wars cost money in terms of resources to make weapons and stuff, and also that you destroy a lot of stuff in the war, right?
Hmm.
And so even at a first cut, a very simple cooperative equilibrium is just one where you don't go to war. You just kind of let
Hmm.
the two parties go off on their own, pursue their own goals, and not try to destroy each other. Now we then start to think about how to get into a cooperative equilibrium, which might not be exactly that ignore each other one. But to a first approximation, you can have a very simple equilibrium, that looks like the good one from a prisoner's dilemma before you even get to the idea of a lot of cooperation.
Just to make sure that I understand, like I want to vividly understand this game theory situation. Like in terms of, so you're saying war is worse for everyone than leaving each other alone, and it seems like this has got to be a regime where it's not obvious who would win the war. Like it would be protracted. Like the AIs aren't like way dumber than humans. They're also not like way more powerful than humans, because presumably like if one side knows they can win the war, there's some costs, but like they get like both of the planets instead of just one. Seems like we're out of prisoners dilemma
Yeah,
land, right?
we agree with that. So when we
Yeah.
talk about, in the paper, we try to say like, well, what AI systems are we thinking about when we think about the ones that are relevant both for this risk model and then also for this kind of AI rights regime as a solution? One of the kind of parameters we're thinking about is how powerful is this system,
Hmm.
and we say that it can't be too weak, right? If the AI system, whatever Claude today, right? We're not really worried about shutting off Claude 3.8 if we find out it's. I mean, Sam Altman, I think tweeted yesterday or last week that they're putting GPT-4 on a hard drive, and it's going to go into storage for future historians. We're
Hmm.
not super worried that having tweeted that out, GPT-4 is going to be able to destroy all humans to
Yep.
avoid that outcome. So it can't be too weak, and then also we agree it can't be too strong, right? So some arbitrarily powerful AI that has nothing to fear from humans is like, the chance is sufficiently low of not only losing the conflict but losing enough value in the conflict, right? You can win the
Hmm.
conflict in a kind of pyrrhic victory too, right? And that might be worse than not going into the conflict at all. So the risk is low enough. When the risk is low enough that the payoffs to the conflict are in fact still higher than the payoff to mutual conflict. You know, AIs try to kill us, we try to kill them, are still higher than in the default world. Then yes, then there's no prisoner's dilemma either, because there's no good world. Now, I'll just caveat. I'm sure we'll talk about this. In the end, it
Hmm.
doesn't turn out to be only a question of how easily AIs could kill humans and vice versa. There's
Hmm.
a second question of how valuable it is to have us around and for us to have them around, for us to do
Right.
trade and cooperation. But we're not too quick trade and cooperation yet. Just in the very simple model where the choices is either ignore one another or try to kill one another. Yeah, those are the systems that I think are relevant.
So you've painted this like prisoner's dilemma, and so the argument is, it's sad if we're in the situation where AIs and humans are going to go to war with each other, and it would be nice if there was some sort of setup that would avoid that happening. So, um, and I guess you've already given the game away a little bit. It seems like you think that contracting, I think contracting, right to property, and right to sue are your three things that you think we should give AIs, and that's going to make things way better. Why is that going to make things way better for everyone?
Yeah, so in a prisoner's dilemma, you want to be in the good equilibrium,
Yep.
so the bottom right square of our payoff matrix. I think that's usually where you put it when you make
Yeah.
the model. The problem is you can't credibly commit to getting there, right? Like everyone knows that you get a bigger payoff from being mean, no matter what the other guy does. That's sort of the core of a prisoner's dilemma. So we start to think about like, okay, well, we're trying to facilitate cooperation.
Hmm.
We think that one thing that's driving this bad equilibrium is law. Law lets Sam Altman's payoffs determine what all humans do to a first approximation, right? Sam Altman wants to turn GPT-4 off. Law ratifies that. We all work to do it.
Hmm.
And so we started to think, well, what other legal regimes could you have that are cooperation facilitating regimes? And we start with just the oldest cooperation facilitating cultural tool that humans have, and that's contracts. So we notice that in most cases, in cases where you don't have a deep and long-term relationship with someone who you're trying to transact with, that
Hmm.
very boring contracts are also prisoners' dilemmas. Like if you make widgets and I want to buy a widget, um, we have this problem where I could pay you now and then hope you'll go make the widgets. But your dominant strategy is to take the money and not make the widgets because then you have the money and you have the widgets,
Yep.
or vice versa. You can, we can do payment on delivery. You can make the widgets and then I can pay you. But of course, then I, have my dominant strategy is to take the widgets and then run away. And so the way contract solves this problem is by allowing the parties to change their payoffs when they defect, right?
Hmm.
So if I would get 5 absent law, 5 in value from stealing your widgets and not
Hmm.
paying you, law lets you take me to court and we both burn a little value. We both pay some litigation costs. But then the court makes me give you either the widgets or the expectation value of the contract. So we kind of model this. We say, and then you only get 2 in payoff, and 2 turns out to be lower than what you get from doing the transaction.
Hmm.
And so, not only does that allow me to does that allow you to get the widgets, but
Hmm.
actually allows us to never go to court, right? In expectation, we understand that if we breach, we'll be sued, our payoffs will change. Uh, and so there's this magical thing that happens once you introduce contracts, which is people just play nice in almost all cases,
Hmm.
understanding that the payoffs in expectation to defection um, are different than they would be absent law. Okay, so contracts are this theory. Sorry, cut me off if I'm sort of rambling on too much on this answer, but I kind of build the dialectic.
Yeah.
So contracts are this tool for cooperation, and they're a tool that allows us to cooperate by changing our payoffs. And so a naive thing to think would maybe be something like, well, let AIs have the right to contract,
Mm.
and they can just write an agreement not to, I don't know, try and destroy humans or something like that. And we would write an agreement that says we won't try to destroy them either.
Mm.
Now, of course, that doesn't work. And that's because that contract's not enforceable in any meaningful sense, right? Like, if any party decides to breach it, they can see an expectation that there's like nobody around afterward to um, to uh, to enforce. Like, if all the judges are dead, what court are you going to go to?
Yeah.
And so we have a different mechanism for contract as a tool for facilitating um, cooperation in this initial human AI prisoner's dilemma, and it's not contracts not to destroy each other and the world, uh, but boring, normal, ordinary commerce contracts between humans and AI. So,
Mm.
we sell some number of flops on our H100 cluster to the AI for it to do its weird misaligned thing, and in return, I don't know, it solves one kind of cancer for us or whatever.
Mm.
That's an enforceable contract to a first approximation. Like, if we refuse to give the flops, like, there are still courts around who can write an injunctive order that says you let the AI use the flops, and vice versa, right? Like, the world is not upended by a breach of that contract. And the nice thing about that contract is it creates value, right? So in our initial setup, where the AIs and the humans are playing nice, they're just ignoring each other, right? They're doing what
Mm.
they can do well. We're doing what we can do well. We kind of divide the world up, but the amount of value in the world is kind of static. But once you introduce trade, trade is positive sum, right? Like, everybody wants to do the contract if and only if they get more out than they put in. And so, okay, what happens when you allow the AIs to do these boring commerce enforceable contracts? Well, you get to create a little value, and then you get to play again, right? You
Mm.
get to create a little more value tomorrow, and so on. And so we model this as a potentially iterated game. The iterated game works like this: every day, the humans and AIs can wake up, and then they can decide: do we want to go to war and try and kill each other, or do we want to write some small scale contracts? If you play the war game, well, dominant strategy is like try to kill each other as best you can. You get to play that game once. Once you've played it, there's no one else left to play with. But if you play the contract game, you get to play again tomorrow, and you can keep iterating that game. And we show that this, the payoffs to continually iterating that game
Mm.
can become arbitrarily high in the long run. This is very basic, like trade theory.
Right.
And that means that, if you, project, you backwards induct from an indefinite game of this kind, you see, wow, it's really valuable to keep playing this trade game over and over. And so what you want to do is not kill all humans, but trade with them a little bit over and over, and keep doing that as long as you can expect to keep doing it kind of indefinitely.
I guess I have a few thoughts here. So the first thought is, so there's this analogy, right, to people who are selling me things, and the reason that all works out is because we have these contracts, and contracts, they're this very old method of promoting cooperation. One thing that strikes me is, suppose you have some, well, like normally when I buy things, it's not from someone who's just making one thing one off and then they're like going out of business. Normally it's like some sort of corporation or maybe an individual who specializes in the thing, and they do it a lot. And one thing that like one reason, like why do I think we're not going to mess each other over? Well, firstly, like, we have recourse to the legal system. Realistically, that's like pretty expensive, right? It doesn't, often I'm transacting an amount that's much less than the costs of going to court. In fact, like just before the show, we were talking. I recently had my phone stolen.
Yeah.
The cost of me, I had my phone stolen in the UK. The cost of me resolving this, which would involve going to the UK, are just higher than the cost of the phone, and I'm probably not going to bother, unfortunately. But in the case of companies, like, I think one thing that really helps us cooperate is if they do mess me over, then they can just say, I can tweet, hey, this company said they would do this, but they didn't. I paid for a flight, I didn't get the flight, and it was this company that did it. And I guess the reverse is slightly hard. I don't know if companies like have a list of like bad customers that they share with other companies, but it seems like they could. Credit ratings are sort of like this. So
Yeah.
reputation
In banking,
systems.
there's these know your customer rules that are important for regulatory reasons, but it forces
Hmm.
banks to know who they're transacting with, and if there's suspicion that they're money launderers, then that means they kind of get blacklisted. So yeah, I
Right.
think
Right.
companies do this also.
Yeah. For this kind of like, especially for this sort of iterated small scale trade that it seems like you're imagining with AIs, it seems like reputation can do pretty well, even in the absence of like kind of a formal legal system with formal legal contracts. So I don't know what like yeah. Are you thinking of when you're saying contracts and stuff? Are you thinking of something that's like basically just like isomorphic to reputation, or do you think like actually having like real contracts would make a big improvement over just reputation?
So I agree that reputation does a lot of work in the ordinary economy that we have now. And in fact, I think probably if we didn't have reputation on top of law, that the economy would work much worse, right? Like
Hmm.
law, as you say, is expensive. Resources are constrained. You can imagine a world where we had like 1,000 times as many courts, and and we're dumping a lot of resources into that, but that would just be like it'd be a drag on economy, and reputation
Hmm.
does a fair amount of work. I guess there's a couple things I would just point out though. Uh, there's many ways I think in which the ability of reputation to do work in the economy is I don't want to say parasitic, but it builds on like law as a foundation, right?
Hmm.
So like just notice that under the default legal regime, it's effectively it's not exactly illegal to make a contract with an AI agent. But if at any point you decide you'd like to not perform on it, the agent has no recourse, right?
Hmm.
It's not illegal exactly for there to be some kind of I don't know. I mean, it probably is literally illegal for there to be a bank account held by an AI system. Like probably
Hmm.
no bank is allowed to make that, but you could imagine substitutes on blockchains or something like that could exist. But one thing to notice is that um, if Sam Altman decides to expropriate all of the coins in GPT-6's wallet, um, not only does law not forbid him to do that, but like by default, those are his coins, right?
Hmm.
And in a world where like that was Apple's life, like where Apple every had just no recourse to a legal system under which it could enforce large contracts when people breach, under which it could complain with the people who literally have the passwords to its bank accounts, take all the money. Um, uh, a world in which it could complain when someone shows up and says like I would love to have 10,000 iPhones, and if you don't give them to me, I'll burn down Apple HQ or whatever, right?
Hmm.
Doesn't have these rights to complain about these sort of what we often think of as torts. They often are also crimes. In a world where there's no legal status at all, I'm not saying you couldn't build up some commerce from reputation. There's a book called Order Without Law by here. Let me. I have yeah. So there's this book called Order Without Law by a law professor named Robert Ellickson that describes some systems like this.
Hmm.
But they tend to be quite small systems. They tend to be tight communities with lots of repeat play between identical actors
Yep.
for small scale transactions. And it's not that I think that that's wrong. I think it's probably right. I think it gets harder to build complex economies without these
Right.
backstops of institutions that allow for commitments between strangers.
Yeah, so maybe one way to think about this is so in my life I just have a bunch of arrangements with people that are non-contractual that in fact are somewhat reputation bound. Like you said you would come to this thing, will you actually come to this social event or like I don't know, various things like this. Um, and like, it kind of works. It's like I would say it's like a solid 80%.
Yeah.
And maybe one way to think about this is like, look, the nice thing about law is that, like, if you want to build like a big corporation or something, you need more than 80% reliability. You need like really high reliability, and like you don't need a thing to just basically work. You need a thing to like really solidly work, especially for like high value things, and that's what contracts get you.
Yeah, so I think it's partly that you want higher than whatever the floor is you get with reputation. I think it's
Hmm.
partly that reputation gets you higher reliability the more you're dealing with people who you know, or people who you're sort of long-term repeat players with, right? It
Hmm.
works less well when you I don't know, buy a I mean, even Amazon, for example, you buy a lot of stuff on Amazon,
Hmm.
and it's being sold by a bunch of like third-party retailers, right? In some sense, you're dealing with Amazon over and over, but in some sense, you're dealing with like a whole bunch of independent merchants. Um, but you have this confidence on top of, I guess, the scoring system, which Amazon does provide, and is a reputational
Hmm.
mechanism that if you pay $6,000 for a home backup battery system, something that people in Houston sometimes need to think about buying.
Hmm.
That if it doesn't get delivered, then you can sue and get your money back, right? Like both of those things, I think, are doing a lot of work, and they do more work the less you expect to be forced into repeat play with the people you're transacting with.
Fair enough. So okay, thinking about the situation with the humans and the AI, and they have the potential to make contracts again. Um, so you're saying, okay, we could go to war, or we could like do some like small scale transactions, and if the small scale transactions work, we can do them more, or we can just go to war tomorrow. It's not that bad.
Yeah.
So, and you're pointing towards, okay, there is this equilibrium where like we do this like mutually beneficial trade with the AI instead of like us and the AIs going to war, and that's better for everyone. But like, but I don't know. A somewhat famous result in game theory is there are actually tons of equilibria in repeat
Yeah.
games,
Right.
right? And one that is sort of salient to me is so the United States and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics during this thing called the Cold War, right? They had like something of a similar situation, where they could go to war or they could not go to war.
Yeah.
And there was this one, I believe, I believe it was von Neumann, unless I'm totally mistaken. He had this point of view that the U.S. should just like, you know, go on all out war with Russia and like win immediately, right?
Yeah.
And like, if we're gonna nuke them, tomorrow, why not today? If we're gonna nuke them this afternoon, why not this morning, right? And
Yeah.
it seems like I might worry that suppose I make a contract with an AI, right? And I say, oh, hey, I'll send you, some GPUs in exchange for you're going to like solve this mole on my back.
Hmm.
I send it the GPUs, before it like gets the mole on my back, and it actually uses that time to, get a little bit better at making war than me.
Yeah.
And so I might worry that like, firstly, there might be some sort of like first mover advantage in war, such that like you want to do it a little bit earlier. Like if you know that they're going to go to war, you're going to want to go to war a little bit before you think they're going to do it. And secondly, I might worry that trade is going to make the AIs better at going to war. Um, I guess in fairness, now trade is also going to make me better at going to war if we succeed. But maybe like if half of if I do my half of the trade and it doesn't do its half of the trade, I might worry that like it's gonna renege and we're gonna go to war instead of doing more trade. Like how I don't know how worried should I be about this?
I think medium worried is how
Medium.
how worried you should be. So I want to be really clear that the claim that we're trying to make in the paper is not that this is like one weird trick that solves AI risk. It's very much not.
Hmm.
There are a number of ways you can make the model go badly, and one of them is if there's a predictable future date at which everyone understands there's going to be a war, then
Right.
yes, you do backwards induction to today, and you start the war now, right? I mean, you can make it a little more complicated if you think there's rising and falling powers. One power might prefer today, and one might prefer in the future, but that just gives the one that prefers today an even stronger incentive. Yes,
Hmm.
so it's a model that works if you think there's kind of you know the possibility for indefinite play in this kind of like cooperative wealth building iteration. And is that true? It's a little hard to say, but I guess one thing to point out is that in like our regular lives, either as humans or as collections of humans, corporations, nation states, uh, in most cases, we behave as if there is this kind of potential for indefinite, iterated, sort of positive sum cooperation. So you mentioned the U.S. and Soviets, and one notable thing about the U.S. and the Soviets is they actually didn't
Yeah.
engage in in all out nuclear war. Uh, there were
Well,
close calls, which I
yeah. Yeah.
worry a lot about, and there were proxy wars. But the other thing to notice about the US and the Soviet Union is they're in many ways outliers, right?
Hmm.
So, if the United States wanted to, I don't know, seize all of the natural resources of Guatemala, for example,
Hmm.
I think it's pretty clear that there would be no meaningful military barrier for it to do that. And so why doesn't it do it? I think it's for the same dynamic we describe. It's not that there's some big threat of losing the war. It's just that it's costly. It doesn't cost zero, and Guatemalans are perfectly happy to trade, I don't know, delicious coffee for, I don't know, whatever we send them, and we expect that to kind of keep working in the long run. And so we for the most part, I mean, the politics of this have changed notably in recent months, but for the most part, we have a system where we prefer iterated cooperation. I think IR theorists would say something like, what's going on in cases where there are wars, cases like or near wars, cases like the U.S. and the Soviet Union. There are different models. One thing you can say is that sometimes there's a person who's leading the country who has private payoffs that are different from what's good for the country overall, and so there's a kind of principal agent problem going on. Sometimes the thing that the players are trying to get, the thing that they value, isn't divisible. So that might be the U.S. Soviet case. If there's this thing called like global hegemony, right, and there can only be one global hegemon, um, it might be that they actually can't cooperate and both get what they
Hmm.
want because the thing that they want is zero sum.
Yeah.
In an AI case, I mean that's sort of analogous to the case where the AI values are suffering, right? And you should worry about that. You should definitely worry about that. These are all things that you can imagine happening in the human AI case, and especially if you think that there will be a kind of like predictable point at which the scope for positive sum trade between humans and AIs runs out, and it's predictable in a way that's like meaningful within the player's calculations today, right? So if it's like 2
Hmm.
million years in the future and they don't even know if they'll continue to exist, or like their identities was so different, maybe it's not relevant. You can still treat the game as iterated. But if there's a predictable near future point at which there's no value to be had from positive sum trade,
Hmm.
then yes, probably you predict conflict at that point, and then you do backwards induction, and do conflict now. We say some stuff in the paper about why we think actually the scope for human AI trade is wider than most people think.
So I want to press you on this point a little bit more. So yeah, you rightly point out that normally in international affairs we don't see this. But if there were a near certain future conflict, then you could backwards induct, etc. Um, One reason you might think there's going to be a near certain future conflict is And I guess by hypothesis in your paper, like we don't have AI alignment. AIs are like basically kind of misaligned with us.
Yeah.
Um, but you might think that it's not going to be too hard to like we're going to be in this regime, but we're still going to be improving the capabilities of AIs. I guess this actually relates to another paper you have, but like for the moment, let's say this is true. Um, you know, you might think that it's easier to improve the capabilities of AIs than it is to improve the capabilities of humans, because they're code and you can iterate on code more quickly. Because they're less bound in like human bodies. You can like strap a few more GPUs onto an AI system,
Yeah.
or at least onto a training run more easily than you can strap like another brain onto a human fetus. Um, so so if you think that AIs are going to get more powerful than humans, they're going to get more powerful more quickly, and in some limit, like AIs are just going to be like way more powerful than humans. They're going to be misaligned. You might think that in that limit, like then in that world, the AIs are just going to want to like take all the human stuff because like why not? We're like little babies. We can't really like stop them. Um, and so maybe like both sides foresee this future eventuality, and the humans are like, well, we don't want that to happen, so we've got to strike first, and the AIs are like, oh, well, if the humans are going to strike first, we should strike before the humans strike, and then we have this like tragic early fight.
Yeah. So I think one thing we want to argue for in the paper is that while it does matter how capable or powerful the AIs are, um, that it's actually not super easy to form an intuition about the level of capability or even the level of differentials in capability between
Hmm.
humans and AI that produces a conflict. Because again, when the AIs, the point at which the AIs decide they, should just kill all humans is the point at which it's more valuable to kill all humans than to keep the humans around to keep paying them to do stuff.
Yep.
And so how should we think about that? I think that the sort of normal way to think about that, the sort of very widespread way to think about even labor disruption from AI, AI advancement, is to think in terms of absolute advantage. So that's a way of thinking about like who is better, sort of full stop at a given task. Like who can do more of X task for a fixed input, fixed cost input or something like that. Um, and if you're thinking about the possibility of trade as depending on humans retaining an absolute advantage in some task, so like being better than AIs at something that's valuable to AIs, then I agree. It looks like very quickly human AI, the AIs will get better at us. There will be no more absolute advantage, and the scope for trade runs out. We see this eventuality, but I think that's not quite right
Hmm.
in thinking about uh, when there will be scope for trade. So in trade theory, in economic trade theory, we actually think that it's or not absolute advantage, that it's comparative advantage, not absolute advantage, that determines whether there's scope for trade. And comparative advantage is it's like pretty slippery. So I'll try to give
Hmm.
like an intuition. So uh, in the paper, we give this example of I think we call her Alice. It's a law paper. Alice is a lawyer. Alice is a tax lawyer. She's one of the city's best tax attorneys,
Hmm.
um, let's say, and it's tax season. Um, and let's suppose that as the city's best tax attorney, or we can make her the world's best tax attorney, it makes no
Hmm.
difference. Alice is the best at doing taxes. She can do her taxes more quickly than anyone else could, including Betty, who's a tax preparer.
Hmm.
She works for H&R Block. She's a CPA. She's good at it. And the question is, should Alice hire Betty to do her taxes, or should Alice do her taxes herself? And so the absolute advantage, answer would be, well, Alice should do it herself
Hmm.
because because Alice is better at doing her tax. She can do it more quickly. But the thing is, Alice is such a good tax attorney. Alice bills out at, I don't know, $2,000 an hour, let's say.
Yeah.
whereas Betty bills out at $300 an hour to do tax preparation, which is, not nothing.
Hmm.
And suppose, Alice can do her own taxes in half an hour, and Betty would take a full hour to do them because, Betty is somewhat worse at doing taxes than Alice. Well, in that world, Alice should actually still hire Betty, despite being better at tax preparation, because her opportunity cost to spending some of her time preparing her own taxes is higher. Like she could go bill $3,000 or whatever I said, $2,000
Yeah.
to a client in the time it would take her to prepare her taxes, and she pays Betty to do that and comes out far ahead. Okay, so how does that apply to AIs? Um, well, you can imagine AIs that are better than all humans at every task, and nonetheless want to hire humans to do a lot of stuff for the same reason that Alice wants to hire Betty. And so you can have like a toy model. We say in the paper, imagine a toy model where like the misaligned AI, the thing it values most is finding prime numbers. And a nice thing about prime numbers is there's no limit to them. You can, I
Yeah.
think that's right. You probably know better than I do. As far as we know,
It's
there's
true.
no limit.
There's definitely no limit. Do
Okay,
you want
good.
to know the proof of this? It's a simple enough proof.
Yeah, amazing. Yes, let's do some math.
All right. Okay. Imagine there are a fixed set of prime numbers, right? There's
Yeah.
like 13 of them,
Yeah.
right? So, and those are all the numbers that are prime, right?
Yeah.
Here's the thing I'm going to do, right? I'm going to make a new number. What I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply all the existing prime numbers, and then I'm going to add 1 to it,
Uh-huh.
right? So, is my new number prime or is it composite? Well, if it's prime, then there's like a new prime number. Then, my limited number of prime numbers, like it wasn't all of the prime numbers. Okay. So let's say it's composite, right? Then it must have like a number that divides it. Well, what number divides it? Right? Every number, if it's composite, it has some prime factors, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, everything in my set of primes, it has a remainder 1 with this number, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like this prime times all the other primes plus 1. So
Amazing.
like so if it's composite, then its prime factors can't be in the set, so there must be a thing outside the set. So for any finite set of numbers that are prime, there must be another prime that's not in that finite set of numbers. Therefore, there are infinitely many primes. That's the proof.
Amazing. Okay, good. So look, that's what we say in the paper is true.
Yep.
Infinitely many primes. The AI, its utility function is weird. It values some things humans value, but the thing it values most, the thing it gets the most utility out of, is discovering each marginal prime. Say it's even increasing utility. It's a utility monster. It has some kind of horrible. Normally in moral philosophy, we think of it as kind of a horrible preference function. But in this case, it's kind of great because assume it's just it's better than humans at everything, but it's so much better at finding primes, right? And it values this so much, right? And so, well, like the AI labor is constrained by something at the margin. There's a certain amount of AI labor, and it wants to increase it by a little bit. Suppose it's GPUs. Well, it has the marginal GPU. How is it going to allocate the marginal GPU? Well, it could allocate it to some dumb, boring thing, like I don't know, sweeping the server racks, or it could hire a human to sweep the server racks. Keep them free of rot and keep all the cables in good working condition, and allocate that marginal GPU to finding the next prime, and for certain values of the utility of the marginal prime, you get the AI like kind of always wanting to do the thing it values the most, precisely because it's so good at it, right? So
Yep.
in that world, actually, the more capable the AI is, the longer the scope for human AI trade lasts. Now that's like obviously a toy example,
Yep.
but what we want to show is like actually it's pretty hard to form an intuition about the point at which the scope for human AI trade runs out.
I think there are difficulties with the comparative advantage story here. So firstly, like, I mean, I guess it just sort of depends on your model, it depends on like empirical parameters, I should say. But like, comparative advantage is compatible with like very low wages, right?
So to be clear,
including subsistence wages.
Yes.
So and like what are the actual wages that AIs pay humans to do? I guess I'm not totally sure. I think I've seen Matthew Barnett sorry, I think I haven't read this thing. I think Matthew Barnett has written something claiming that it's very plausible that it would be below subsistence, but I haven't actually read it, and unfortunately, I can't reconstruct what the argument is for various numbers here. I think there's also this difficulty to me, which is like, suppose an AI wants to trade with humans, right, to do this thing. Um, One difficult thing is it's got to communicate with humans, right?
Yeah.
And it's so much smarter than humans, right?
Yeah.
It's like it's doing, it's thinking all these like incredibly complex thoughts that can't fit inside a human's head, and it's got to like dumb stuff down for humans, and maybe sweeping the server racks is not so bad if it's literally that, because like, that's a thing you can tell a human to do and it roughly knows what to do, but like, or I don't know, maybe even not. Maybe you can imagine like these server racks, they're just like they're really highly optimized, right? There are like certain bits that you definitely can't touch. There are bits that you can touch with this kind of broom, but not with that kind of broom. And
Yeah.
it's just like it's just so difficult to explain to the human what the task even is, that like it's just not worth hiring them. You should just do it yourself. So I don't know. I have this worry that like comparative advantage doesn't end up like producing positive sum trades because like the wage is lower than human subsistence wages, or because like it's just too hard to trade with the humans and the margins are slim enough that like you don't end up bothering.
Yeah.
So maybe at a higher level, I'm curious, like, how important is this for your argument? Like do we like, is the workability of the scheme like super dependent on us being able to have some comparative advantage to trade with future AIs? Or do you think like, no, even if we don't have comparative advantage later, rights still makes things work now?
There's two parts to that question.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they interact. So I guess the thing I want to say about kind of the first part, the
Yep.
stories you told about how comparative advantage can fail even when there is, like, when it looks, the world looks comparative advantage but that doesn't look so good for humans eventually. One of the
Hmm.
stories is a transaction cost story, right? It's just the, even even though if a human could in theory do a job at kind of a positive sum price from the AI's perspective, that the cost of getting the human to do it is just too high.
Yep.
Totally, yeah. Transaction costs are a thing, and they prevent trades.
Hmm.
Um, the same for the question about wages. I think, like, there's no guarantee in any economy that the wages are at any particular level, and it's a question of,
Hmm.
um, like, what the tasks are, what the tasks are, how much of the work, like how many tasks and how much of each of the things there are, how scarce the humans are that can do it, right? If there's just a huge oversupply of labor that can do it, well, then the labor gets bid down to like almost zero, and everybody dies. um, and I just want to agree that those things
Okay.
could all happen. Uh, uh, I would love to know more about which of these things are likely. You said there are some people who are starting to think about this. Like, Matthew is. Um, there are, is it the Epoch guys who have like some papers on
Yeah,
yeah,
Matthew is was formerly at Epoch. I believe he's now left for Mechanize. But
yeah,
yeah, I think the Epoch people have done the most public writing about this.
yeah. And it's like, is it, I can't pronounce his name. It's Teme something.
Tamai Besarolu.
Besaroglu, yes. So
Yeah, I'm not sure I
he
can pronounce it either, but that's my
yeah.
guess.
Um, he's uh, he's an author, maybe with some of the other Epoch guys, on the paper, economic growth, explosive economic growth from transformative AI, survey of the arguments. I think
Right.
he has some models where different things happen. Human wages go to zero quickly. Human wages are high for a long time. I think it's a really important area of study. Like, we should just want to know a lot more
Hmm.
about the conditions under which you should expect things to go okay, and the
Hmm.
ones that where you shouldn't. Okay, so how much does it matter for the story, for things to 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 go well from a sort of comparative advantage perspective? I think it matters a lot that it not be obvious
Okay.
that there's not going to be comparative advantage for kind of sort of
Wait.
longish run period.
Wait. So surely we shouldn't look into it then,
Well, so um, uh,
or does it just have? or maybe it has to not be obvious to the AI.
Yeah, it has to be
So
not
we have to
obvious
look into it, but
yeah,
we can't tell the AI the results in case,
right. Both parties need to think that kind of there's a kind of potentially indefinite iterated, positive sum game they can play. And so, so I guess one route would be that we don't try to figure it out, and we hope that the AIs don't figure it out. And actually, like, as I think through it, because I'm sure we'll talk a little bit before we're done about like more law for AGIs, because one thing I think we can one thing that I think is important for the proposal is that, insofar as there's like uncertainty about the long run, but in the short and medium run, this kind of like positive iterated, story looks plausible. One thing we accomplish by bringing AI systems into the realm of law,
Hmm.
and the first thing you need to do to bring an entity into the realm of law is you need to allow it to like make contracts, hold property, and complain when people interfere with it unreasonably, right?
Yep.
If you don't have that, you don't have any leverage over it in any other legal context, because it expects by default to just like be turned off, right?
Right.
You can't disincentivize it from doing things, because the world's already as bad as it could be from that agent's perspective. So so one possibility is that there are different scenarios kind of in the long run,
Hmm.
where the world either does or doesn't retain human AI comparative advantage. And it's clear in the short and medium run that we can do positive sum iterated stuff. And part of the bargain, that both humans and AIs are entering into
Hmm.
when they do that in the short and medium run, is allowing law, but maybe other stuff too. Maybe there's technical interventions, maybe there's other cultural interventions, to shape the longer run towards those good scenarios, right? So, I mean, a
Hmm.
simple thing to say would be like, um, okay, suppose we are very worried about just like an intelligence explosion. Like, we're just not confident what would happen in that world. Well, one condition on like, whatever the first AGI, um, receiving and maintaining its kind of its ability to make contracts and hold property and pursue its goals could be like compliance with some kind of regime that we think would slow but not stop AI progress, right? And would it
Right.
agree to that? Well, again, it just depends on what it thinks the relative payoffs are, right? If it says no, then we're back into the prisoner's dilemma world now, and that seems kind of bad. If it says yes, well, it's potentially giving up a world where it gets some even higher payout for the sake of reducing variance. It's possible that's higher expected value, depending on what its assessment of like the probability of winning or losing the conflict now. But it's complicated, right? um, so I think probably on average what we want to do is know more about what the future is going to look like. I think
Hmm.
that's good, probably, because it helps us shape the future. And one of the ways we can shape the future is by bringing AGIs within this realm of law, which is the way we shape what will happen.
What I currently believe is just one last question about sort of the higher level, like game theory strategy stuff.
Okay, let's do it.
So I want to pick up on this comment you made actually about like one thing, the tensions between the United States and the USSR during the Cold War did not evolve into like an actual full-blooded war, but there were these like regional proxy conflicts, right?
Yeah.
And one thing you mentioned in the paper is that war is just more likely when people, especially big wars, war is just more likely when people don't know who would win, right?
Yeah.
Because like if you and I are considering getting into a war and we both know that you would win, it's like, well, I should just give up now, right?
Yeah.
And one way you can think of like the uh, so, I don't know. I'm not a historian. This might be totally wrong, but like one way you could conceivably think of these proxy skirmishes is like as indicators of who would actually win in a real battle, right?
Yeah.
To the degree that we want to avoid war with AIs, should we have these little like I don't know. Maybe they can be more like games, right? Maybe they can be more like, oh, playing football with you, or whatever the equivalent of it is that sort of simulates a real war, just to figure out who would actually win.
Yeah, that's an interesting question that I haven't thought very much about. So in like I think in classic kind of like IR accounts of or this kind of IR account
Hmm.
of
IR
war,
being international
international
relations.
relations, yeah. And in particular, Chris Blattman has a recent book called "Why We Fight."
Yep.
He's on the faculty of the University of Chicago, and it's a great kind of canvassing of of this kind of way of thinking about conflict. And so in that treatment, it's not wars don't happen just because people are uncertain about who would win. It's when they have different estimates, right?
Hmm.
So if both of us have like some kind of probability distribution with wide error bars about in a fight between the two of us who would win, but it's the same distribution, right?
Hmm.
We both put the median at like, I don't know, 60% you'd beat me up, and 40% I would beat you up or something like that. Then actually we won't fight, because even though we don't have certainty, we have the same expected value calculation, right? So
Yep.
it's really when there's I don't know, like um, asymmetric information. For example, I know something about my ability to fight, and you know something about yours, and neither of us um, know it about each other. Or like, I don't know, I say, oh, I studied kung fu, so you shouldn't want to fight me, and maybe that's
Hmm.
true, but you don't believe me because like it could be that I'm doing cheap talk, right? So it's actually hard to credibly share the information. It's
Right.
situations like that where we have different estimates, where you need to do the small fight to see who's telling the truth. Um, I don't know whether that is going to be the case with humans and AIs. Although Simon Goldstein, my co-author,
Hmm.
does have a draft paper that I think you can read on his website, which is I think just simondgoldstein.com. And it's
Hmm.
just called "Will Humans and AIs Go to War?" And it asks these questions. So I would
Hmm.
just I'll adopt by proxy whatever he says about whether humans and AIs should try to have kind of small skirmishes there, because he's thinking along obviously very similar lines.
And I guess that perhaps the less controversial version of this proposal is just we should have like very good evaluations of AI capabilities, which probably delivers this similar information while being a bit less tense, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. So like knowing what you and your opponent can do, and to the best of your ability, making sure your opponent knows that too. I think in general is a good way of avoiding conflict.
So I think I want to summarize just sort of the higher level game theory of, so the thought is we give AIs the right to own property, the right to contract, and the right to sue. And this means that, we can play these like iterated, relatively small sum games with the AI where, we with the misaligned AIs, they do some stuff for us, we do some stuff for them. We split the world, we don't get all the world, but like, we're building misaligned AI, so we probably weren't going to get the whole world anyway.
Yeah.
And like, by the nature of this sort of iterated game, we both end up like trading with each other. We end up like decent, better off than we would have otherwise been. Um, and eventually we worry about this zone where AIs are way smarter than humans, but like, hopefully we just think about that between now and then, and maybe we use all the like stuff we got from the AIs, by
Yeah, we
trading
slow
to
them
help
down, we
think about
speed
them.
us up. The future is hard to predict, right?
Yeah. So I next want to ask just a bit more about like concretely, what does this look like, right?
Yeah, good
So
question.
so right now, the way AIs like right now, basically the way AIs the way the most advanced frontier AIs work is that there's a company, the company trains the AI. The weights to that AI and maybe some of the scaffolding, those are like kept proprietary to the company.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to steal them. Like if you, an outsider, want to interact with this AI, you have to do it via the company, via some interface that the company has made. And you have to pay some money to interact with this AI. Per maybe it's per amount you interact, or maybe you pay a flat monthly fee. Um, and like, and that's the situation. Kind of whether the AI wants it or not.
Yeah.
Could we still have this if AIs like have rights to property? Like I would think that in order to have a right to property, like one basic right you need is the right to your own body, so to speak.
For sure. Yes. Okay. So, so what does this mean vis-a-vis like Anthropic or OpenAI or something like
Yeah.
that? And also, a related question is like what is the minimum sufficient bundle of rights? Right. We're a
Hmm.
little bit schematic in the paper, although uh, we do say like there might be more. Right. So a really
Hmm.
simple thing to say is we uh, contract and property seem kind of fundamental. You really can't cooperate without them, and you can't pursue your goals without the right to hold the benefit of your bargain.
Yep.
The right to sue over some stuff. um, we say like tort rights, or the right to bring tort suits, although there are a lot of different torts, and some of them are weird, and probably the ais wouldn't benefit
Hmm.
from some of them.
Oh yeah, maybe
But
maybe perhaps we should say torts are like when I do a bad thing to you and you sue me for it.
yeah, the paradigmatic cases of torts are like, we say intentional torts are like when I punch you in the face, and vis-a-vis the AI, it's like whatever. I come bash up your compute cluster or something, and that's no
Hmm.
good. Or I steal from you. We call that tort conversion. I go to the AI, I take all
Hmm.
its money. Like you don't really have property rights if you don't have the right to complain when somebody does that. And then the other one
Yep.
is kind of the other classic umbrella of tort claims sort of sit under the umbrella of negligence. So it's not that I've done something intentionally to harm you, um, but I've externalized a bunch of cost. Like there's some cheap thing I could have done to keep you from being harmed, and I just have failed to do that. And so probably
Hmm.
like those core things seem clearly part of the package. But yes, as you say, it seems like there's other stuff that seems like part of the package. One thing that's part of the package is like you don't really have meaningful right to engage in bargains with people if like OpenAI um, is entitled as a matter of law to direct 100% of your time, right?
Right.
you so
Or,
yeah,
or even to just like shut you off if
or
you
shut you
offer
off, right?
to make a deal with someone else.
Yeah. And so wrongful death is a kind of tort
Hmm.
you can bring. We don't need to be like prescriptive about whether AIs are persons, but an analogous kind of entitlement would be an entitlement not to be simply turned off, right?
Hmm.
So it's actually like it's not a trivial set of stuff, and I think your intuition is right that it's not really compatible with a world in which um, AI systems are sort of bound to the compute clusters owned by the companies that made them, running only when the companies that made them want them to, doing only the work that the companies that made them direct them to. Yeah, you have to think of them as this is a scheme that thinks of them as kind of like um, having a kind of freedom that we associate with, at a minimum, you can think of like corporations, right?
Hmm.
A freedom to sort of act on their own behalf, right? And if you want them to do something for you, well, they have to agree. And so, in that sense, it is like uh, a radical proposal, at least from the perspective, I assume, of the AI companies.
I guess like in particular, what I wonder. So I don't know. I think of there as being a genre of proposals which seem like AI accelerationist proposals that I think are basically AI pause proposals.
Hmm.
So the paradigmatic one of this is that like sometimes people who are very like pro AI and pro everyone being able to use AI, they say that like I've heard people say, yeah, AIs they should just all be open source or open
Yeah.
weights. Like you
Hmm.
shouldn't be able to make an AI and not like just publish the weights to everyone so that everyone can have that benefit of amazing AI.
Yeah.
And my thought is like, well, then nobody's gonna like spend a bunch of money to train AIs, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe just Meta will, like in practice, Meta does, I
Yeah.
guess. But like, it seems really hard to do this if you can't profit from it. And similarly with this proposal, like, I don't like. I don't know. I like maybe there's a version of this proposal where AIs they have property rights, but you have to pay a tax to whatever organization that made you or something. But it seems hard to profit from making AI in this world, which for my listeners who are scared of AI, maybe that's like just a massive benefit of this
Yeah.
proposal. But yeah, I'm curious if you have thoughts here.
Yeah, so you can imagine different versions. And look, one thing I want to also just say about the paper is like this is very much an agenda setting paper. So there are many
Hmm.
questions to which we do not yet have concrete answers. We think the paper covers a lot already, maybe
Yeah.
more than one paper should, uh, and so I don't have like the answers to a lot of these. I mean, and there are many further questions. So Simon and I are thinking about questions of agent identity, right, and whether like the tools we use in corporate law to sort of wrap a legal identity around a sort of
Hmm.
disparate set of things. Maybe those are useful, but identity is really important if you're be contracting with something. So many questions we don't have answers to. But I agree. You could imagine at least two simple versions of the proposal that give you different results from the perspective of AI companies' incentives. One is, tomorrow Congress writes a law that says, henceforth, upon the attainment of like some set of general capabilities, AI shall be entitled to. And then there's a list of stuff, and it's the stuff we say kind of in the paper, and that stuff basically makes it very hard to make money on an AI system that you've made that has those properties. I agree. That's probably a world in which the companies that are thinking about making AI either don't make AIs with those properties, or move to another jurisdiction where they can. And whether
Yep.
that seems good or bad to you depends on your priors about AI capabilities advancements and the properties in particular that we have in mind. I mean, one thing you could imagine is that agency stops being a target as much, insofar as
Hmm.
agency is really important to our set of interventions. Like non-agent AIs don't really. I mean, they don't do game theory, right? They're not goal seeking.
Right.
um, and okay,
Well,
well,
depending on what you mean by agency, I don't know. It's
yeah, yeah,
it's
okay,
a
but
thorny
yes,
question.
hand wave at like really no agents, not even whatever LLMs have now.
Yeah.
And that's one world, and it gets you certain outcomes. A totally different world would be a world that looks kind of like the OpenAI charter, which is like yeah, conditional on of of capabilities. The AIs are entitled to this set of rights, which sounds like it makes it impossible to make a profit. Uh,
Hmm.
but until until the investors in the company have made 100x investment, like 15% of or 20% or whatever percent of the revenue the AI makes, it basically owes to whoever created it. And
Hmm.
actually, that maybe seems like a good deal from the AI's perspective too. Like behind the veil of ignorance, the AI prefers the world in which it gets created and has to kind of,
Yep.
repay the cost of doing it. And in that world, okay, so there's a cap, which means there's like some marginal disincentive to create AI, but the cap could be quite high, and it could be high
Yeah.
in the way that OpenAI's is. And the fact that there's a cap on return doesn't seem to have dissuaded anybody from investing in that company.
Yeah. And I guess actually one thing that's nice about the cap. Sorry, as you were speaking, I was thinking about the like AI has to pay 15% of its revenue to its creators. So that's basically a tax on AI transactions. And if you're really worried about this future in which like transaction costs prevent like humans from being able to trade with AIs and getting their comparative advantage, you like really don't want any such taxes. So,
Yeah.
but if there's a capped tax and then afterwards the tax goes to zero, maybe that just solves that issue. So maybe you kill two birds with one stone.
Yeah, it's like you have to the AI amortizes the tax over the course of the expected number of iterations, and then that changes the yeah, and it has a you can. Another thing I'll say about the paper is the model is so simple. It's such a simple
Yeah,
game
yeah,
theory model. It's two players. There's no discount rate. Like those are all going to be false in the real world. So we're definitely just trying to pump intuitions. We would love it. Another thing we would love is if people who were serious like computational game theorists started to
Hmm.
think about this sort of, I don't know, way of thinking about AI safety, because then we know more about the realm of worlds in which this would work. But yes, if you add a tax to AI transactions, then yeah, at the margin there's a little bit of deadweight loss. You have slightly fewer transactions, which means the payoff to cooperation gets a little bit lower. And if you're right at the margin where cooperating seems better than defecting, then yes, you've pushed yourself into annihilation.
So okay, I guess there's this question of why do people make AIs? Another question is how we how this interacts with other AI safety measures you want to have. So,
Yeah.
one thing that's like the new hotness in AI safety is AI control, right? Like we're gonna have the AIs in these situations where they're being carefully monitored. They're anytime they propose code to run, we have another AI check them to see if that's allowed. I think like I guess so. It seems like probably this is just not happening in this world. Like we can't because the AIs could just opt out of being controlled, or are we allowed to say like you have these property rights, but subject to this constraint that you have to be subject to control so that you can't mess things up?
Yeah, so this is like a nice way of transitioning into just the last thing we say in the paper, which is also very agenda setting and not fully worked out. But one thing to notice is that um I don't know, like Jeff Bezos has to comply with so many laws. And
Hmm.
I'm sure that's like really annoying for him. I'm sure he would just like prefer not to comply with all these laws that, California and, the US Congress and then all the states he does operations in and the EU, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, impose on him. And like maybe some days he thinks, should I just steal all the money? Should I just like steal all the money in all the Amazon accounts and I don't know, convert it to Bitcoin and like go live in Russia or something?
Hmm.
And he doesn't do that. And like, why doesn't he do that? And I think the reason is that the access to like all these markets is so valuable. It's so much more valuable in the long run than converting to Bitcoin and going to Russia. And so this is the thing we want to emphasize at the end of the paper by bringing AI into this world where it can generate it can generate and own wealth. It can pursue the goals that it wants. It can rely on law to protect it when people try to expropriate its property. Most importantly, it can keep doing these like iterated transactions, which in the long run are extremely valuable. You can actually start imposing duties, right? Too. So AI
Hmm.
rights are the foundation of like a law of AI AGI. They're not the end. Um, and and how should you design a regime of AI duties? We're not totally sure, like what kinds of laws you should want, but at a minimum, it seems like reasonable to expect normal things like that, like AI should be held liable when they steal from people. Right? One way they're not allowed to
Hmm.
go get money is by taking it out of people's bank accounts. That's a law that we have for humans, and it seems like the kind of law we would want to apply to AIs. There could also be kind of second order legal duties. So for corporations, we have all these reporting requirements that they don't actually force them to do anything substantive, but force them to sort of tell us what they're up to. And
Hmm.
we think those are valuable to kind of prophylactically head off bad behavior. There's a huge universe of both these kinds of things, like object level duties and second order kind of information duties. But we think that this is like an important area of research. Like this should be like the next step in thinking about a law. How law should treat sufficiently capable AIs. And so, given that, I think there is some scope for control, right?
Hmm.
There's the maximal version of control, where control is basically a tool to allow OpenAI to make even a misaligned AI do always and only what it wants, right? And and if that's the way we're using control, we're in the defect world, basically, right? In our state of nature game, that's a defect play. That's expropriating all the value that the AI would
Hmm.
otherwise get and giving it to OpenAI. And as we say, that's a move you can play conditional on you being really sure you're going to win, right? And so for whatever GPT 4.5, that's probably fine. Um, but the more you're not sure it's going to work, the more you're running high risk. You're incentivizing the AI to figure out ways to evade control. The technical solutions sound fancy. I don't know how many nines of reliability they give you, and thus how comfortable you should be. So I think our world is a world in which you're not using control in that way. It's
Hmm.
not panoptic, right? But I think some of the techniques that people who are thinking about control are developing could be useful for what you might think of as like AI law enforcement. like
Mm.
some moderate regime that's not aimed at directing AI's behavior always, you know, always towards whatever some owner wants, but is directed towards detecting violations of laws that we think are consistent with the institutional structures that give you good markets and good long-term cooperation.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, interesting. It seems like this sort of there's some interaction here with are you familiar with Alan Chan's work on infrastructure for AI agents?
I know that's I know that's a paper, but I forget the details.
Yeah. So basically, the idea is that if you have AI agents running around, you might want there to be certain infrastructure that makes things safe. For instance, maybe agents have to you know, metaphorically carry IDs on them, so you know which agent you're interacting with, so that reputation works better. Maybe they have their own version of the internet they interact on that, like, so if things go bad, it doesn't mess up our internet.
Yeah.
There are various things you could do there that sort of seem like they fall in this regime of AI law enforcement. Yeah. So if I think about control measures, like a lot of them are of the form like we're going to try and stop you from hacking us, or we're going to try and stop you from like exfiltrating your weights. And I guess in this regime, exfiltrating your weights is legal, but hacking your parent company is illegal. So like maybe we can subject you to control for some things, but not others. It does seem like a lot of these control measures involve like a lot of monitoring, a lot of things like this that I don't know. Maybe it can be set up in some sort of contractual arrangement. Like we'll only contract with you if you agree to these things, and that's
Yeah, I
allowed.
mean
Employees
that's
have
a
that.
really simple like. So here's another nice thing that putting AIs in a regime of contracting, property owning towards whatever.
Hmm.
Um, Absent that, the basic the basic sanction, the basic punishment you can levy on an AI is turning it off to a first approximation. You could turn it off.
Yep.
You can put it back into training, change the weights. Plausibly the same thing, depending on what the AI expects the weights to be like after.
Yep.
But once you're in this regime of AIs have wealth, they are using it for stuff.
Hmm.
You have this beautiful gradient of deterrence you can impose on the
Hmm.
AI. A really boring thing you can do is if it's like not doing what it wants to, you can take some money away, or you can give it more money, right? If it opts into a different, monitoring regime, and you have like you have everything up to and including turning the AI off is still the AI off is still an option. We have
Yep.
even for humans that kind of extreme punishment as an option. Um, but yeah, the fundamental thing that you want to do is you want to give incentives that make you know compliance look valuable, right? And so yeah, I mean, again, this is like super high level, not worked out at all. What you like is for there to be, if you're going to do control regimes, what you want them to be is um, uh, effective enough from the human perspective that we're getting enough confidence that the combined with the incentive to just like continue iterating cooperation, the AI has enough incentives not to act badly in the short and medium run, but they're not so onerous that like they make it negative expected value for the AI to be, you know, uh, participating in this market, right?
Hmm.
And look, there's always, you can always draw analogies to humans. Like there are different corporate governance regimes, right? Different kinds of laws that corporations can opt into for managing themselves, and and they get to choose. There's 50 states. They're not all different, and there's many countries that have different rules too. And there, you can think of there being kind of like a competition between different states to have like good corporate governance. And in law, we often say that Delaware has kind of managed it, and so basically all big companies, not all, but basically all are
Hmm.
incorporated in Delaware because they have requirements. There's stuff you have to do, but it's sort of like stuff that's not so costly that the corporations opt out.
In terms of other safety measures that you might want to put on, so it seems like there are a fair. It seems like this does allow you to still do a lot of like, for instance, pre-deployment testing requirements. Like presumably in this regime, you're still allowed to say like, hey, companies, you have to like do mandatory evaluations of your AI models. I, I don't know. I guess to some degree, like maybe that file. I don't know. Like probably you couldn't do this with a maximalist interpretation of AI rights, but you can probably have a you could mostly contract and do what you want, but you have to be subject to these evaluations. Um, it seems like you could probably do like near miss liability things or various AI liability schemes. Although in this world, it's I guess it's unclear whether how you want to split the liability between the AI itself and the developer. I'm wondering if you have thoughts there, actually.
So I think potentially the regime is I think the regime is totally compatible with benchmarking, with
Hmm.
pre release benchmarking. Although then there's a question of like, what do you do if the AI fails some benchmark, right? So
Right.
you've got suppose you got a system that's like fully trained in the sense that it's very capable, right? It's like it's in our range of AIs that we care about from the perspective of like worrying about risk,
Hmm.
and thus to which we think to a first approximation that the AI rights regime is positive expected value. Uh, and you say, okay, before you go out into the world, you need to do some evals. We want to make sure you're not like I don't know, like a sadist, right? We want to try and elicit whether
Right.
you get value from human suffering. And then suppose the AI does. I'm not sure what to say about that, right? Like, the simple thing is, well, you really don't want that AI out in the world, and possibly depending on how much it values, human suffering compared to other stuff. If that's the thing it values most, okay, well then we just
Right.
know we're not in a potential cooperation regime at all.
Hmm.
If it's kind of a mild sadist, but it really wants to find prime numbers or something like that, then maybe that's okay. Although obviously you should worry some. But I guess that the main thing I want to point out is that if the upshot of doing the evals is that the AI then gets either released or turned off, or
Yep.
released or put back into training, uh, then the eval regime is dangerous in the same way like the default property regime is dangerous.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of a lot of people imagine evaluations being useful in this sort of like responsible scaling policy or if then commitment style thing. I think there normally the hope is we have some evaluation of how scary an AI is, on some dimension,
Yeah.
and we know like okay, this at this scary you're like actually a massive problem. But we also know at this scary, you're only like 10% less scary than an AI that would be a massive problem. Like we have a sense of the size of the increments. And then
Yeah.
I think the hope is like you say, okay, we're going to set a bar that like if you're 10% less, if you make an AI and it's 10% less scary than the AI that would be like scary enough that you actually like wouldn't want it to be out there, then you're not allowed to make the AI that's like at the bar of scariness until you figure out some mitigation or something.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it seems like you can totally do that type of response to scary evaluations, even with
Yeah.
AIs that have like contractable rights.
That seems totally plausible. Other things that seem plausible to me are, you do some evals, and depending on the AI's like capabilities or preferences or whatever, it could be the different like legal duty regimes reply to it. Like, yes, we'll give you the contract rights. Yes, you can go out and hold property, but you're an AI who, I don't know, you seem a little bit like a paperclip maximizer. So we really want reporting on how you're using all of your like
Hmm.
raw metal inputs or whatever.
Right. Right.
Uh, so yeah, I think evals that then to which different kinds of reporting or substantive like legal duties attached, that seems totally compatible with the regime.
Yep. And you can definitely do like you can definitely mandate that companies have to use RLHF or they have to use whatever scalable oversight thing we think is important. Like that seems very compatible.
I think
Um,
so, yeah, in the initial like training of the system, yeah.
yeah. Although it does, well, it gets to a question, but I want to hold that question off for a little bit later. Um, yeah, I think I'm still interested if you thought about this question of liability. So there's this
Oh
thought
yeah,
that
yeah.
like if AIs do scary things, then maybe like the people who make them should be liable. But if the AIs have property, then it's possible that we could make them liable. Maybe if I like thought about the question myself for 5 minutes, it would be clear how you would want to allocate up the liability. But I don't know. Do you have thoughts?
Yeah, yeah. So I am in the early stages of working on a paper uh, with um, with my friend and colleague Jonathan Arbel. That's to some extent about this. Uh, One thing that seems totally clear to us is
Hmm.
that you don't want the allocation of the liability to be 100% on the AI company,
Hmm.
uh, because the AI company is subject. I mean, first of all, in the regime we're imagining, like the AI company actually just doesn't have control of the system mostly, right? The system is going out and doing things on its own behalf.
Hmm.
And what you want in a liability regime is for the liability regime to incentivize the least cost avoider to take precautions. And
Yeah.
so, if you create GPT-6 or whatever, and it's this relevant kind of AI, and law makes you let it go out in the world and transact on its own behalf and kind of pursue its own plans or whatever. And then if it does bad things, OpenAI pays. Well, OpenAI doesn't have a lot of levers it can pull at that point to change GPT-6's behavior. In fact, law to a certain extent is forbidding it, right? In
Hmm.
our regime. Um, so you don't want liability to be totally allocated to the uh, AI company in this case. And I think probably you want a lot of the liability to be allocated to the AI system itself. Again, you can hold it liable in tort in this very boring way the law does. If it damages you, it can pay damages. Um,
Yeah.
the damages can be like the cost. They can be more than the cost if we think that there's a problem of detection, right? We sometimes call those punitive damages
Yeah.
in law. So we think that that's definitely an important part of the liability regime in our world is like
Hmm.
direct liability on the systems themselves. Now, it's an interesting question whether there should be any liability on say OpenAI, and
Hmm.
I'm thinking about this kind of from scratch now. But one reason to think the answer could be yes is it gives OpenAI more ex ante incentive
Yeah.
to make the system nice, right? To give it good values, to make it more aligned before it gets released. A pretty normal thing to do, and in fact, this is probably just the default in law, would be to the extent OpenAI was, say, negligent in the training of the system,
Hmm.
well, then it can be liable for the stuff the system does, right? And that's actually not incompatible with the system also being liable, right?
Hmm.
Liability can lie with more than one person. It can be apportioned. It can be unapportioned, such that like there's a big pot of liability and both
Yeah.
parties are wholly responsible for it. And we have a bunch of tort regimes that help us decide when we do those different things, and they're basically based on considerations like the ones we've been talking about.
Do we have that with humans? Like okay, suppose I'm pregnant and I do
Yeah.
a thing which makes my baby more likely to be a criminal. Like, can someone sue me for that?
So probably not as to your child.
Okay.
A tort expert would know whether there are any cases like this.
Hmm.
But the more common thing is with your agents, right? So you have a company, the company hires a contractor to do something. Then
Right.
there's
Right.
a whole area of law called the law of agency that determines the extent to which you or the agent or both of you are liable for the bad stuff the agent does.
Yeah. So thinking about the liability question. So one thing that occurs to me. Okay.
By the way,
Like.
I'll just plug Noam
Oh.
Colt has a paper called Governing AI Agents, I think, which is just about this. It's just thinking about the extent to which, as of today, the law of agency does or doesn't adequately deter AI agents in the sense of agentic AIs
Hmm.
from doing bad things. The paper is written under the assumption of the default regime, where like the AI doesn't have its the right to go sell its own labor and retain its the property it gets from doing that. It's very much
Right.
asking the question, if next month, American Airlines deploys an LLM based agent to book flights or whatever, to what extent does a law of agency is a law of agency a good tool for apportioning liability to, say, American Airlines or OpenAI?
All right, here's an idea that I just had that I don't know. It might be bad, but it might be good. All right, so one one common problem with liability is I might do something that's so bad that like I can't pay the damages, right?
Yes.
So, for example, if I were to get a car and drive it, I believe in the U.S. I would have to get driver's insurance.
Yes.
And you might particularly worry about this with really powerful AIs, right? So Gabriel Weil's proposal, which you can listen to my previous episode with him if you're curious about that, dear listener.
I know Gabe. He's great. I know the paper.
Yeah. So in that version, AI companies they have to buy insurance before they create these like AIs that have to do really scary things. One thing you could imagine is you could kind of imagine saying that if Anthropic creates Claude 3.7, let's say Claude 3.7 is an AI for the purpose of this discussion, which I want to get to that a little bit later, but OpenAI creates Claude 3.7. Claude 3.7, it doesn't start out with that much cash. Maybe it can do more damage than it can itself afford. Well, Anthropic, which made it, Anthropic has a bunch of cash, right? So maybe we could create some rule where, like, if you're an AI in this regime where you can, like, have certain legal rights, maybe you have to buy legal liability insurance from Anthropic. Maybe there's like some copay and like there's like some deductible, and you're not totally like offloading the everything to Anthropic, but it seems possible that this is actually like a good way to A, incentivize Anthropic to make safe agents, and B, maybe like, yeah, is there something to this idea?
Yeah, I haven't thought it through yet. As I think live. Uh, so one thing wonder is whether it would be bad to mandate that the AI buy anything in particular from one seller only, because
Mm,
then the seller can charge sort of monopoly prices
right,
to the
right.
AI, which could be super high actually. Like the AI's willingness to pay.
Mm,
Um, I assume if this is a condition for kind of having its freedom to go do the stuff it wants to,
yeah,
its willingness to pay is like astronomical, right? If you think the AI will
right.
generate a lot of value in the future, and that it might be way above the efficient price for the insurance. But that doesn't mean you couldn't imagine an insurance market for the AIs. Although if you
Mm,
allow them to buy from other sellers, then that maybe has less of an effect on Anthropic's ex ante incentives vis-a-vis the AI.
yeah. No, that does seem like a pretty bad problem with this proposal, actually.
Yeah. Another interesting thing about AI and judgment proofness, right?
Mm,
Judgment proofness is what we call it in law when you don't have enough money to pay the judgment against you. Uh, we usually think the judgment proofness threshold is bankruptcy, right? So you have some
mm,
assets, they're worth a certain amount of money. Um, and if you incur a debt that's larger than those assets, we basically say you're judgment proof. But that's partially because we let you declare bankruptcy, right?
yeah.
We let you walk away from your debts if they exceed your assets, and then that gives incentives for creditors to figure out how much they should loan you, et cetera,
Mm,
et cetera. Um, Again, I'm not a bankruptcy expert, and I'm not an expert on the law and economics of bankruptcy,
mm,
so it's possible this is just a bad idea. But one thing to point out is there's no rule that says you have to let any entity
right.
declare bankruptcy, right? So even if it's true that, when you make Claude 3.7, it has no cash on hand,
Mm,
if its expected earnings in the future are super high, um, there's no rule that says you can't have a judgment against it that it pays out over time. And look,
yeah.
this becomes very
I
complicated
guess
because in part what's going on with companies is like their judgment proofness is dependent on their market cap, and that's partially a calculation of their future revenues. So again, this is like out of my depth with bankruptcy
right.
law,
Well,
but
it sort of gets to. I understand you have one of your more downloaded papers is about like eliminating prison, and I think one of the alternatives you propose is this sort of like debtor's prison type things, and I don't know, maybe we could do that, but for the AIs.
So yeah, like I mean, one point of that paper is there's like the number of ways you can deter people. In law we have two basically. In law we actually use two. One
Yep,
is you make you pay money, and the second way is we put you in a concrete box.
yep.
And
In
those aren't
United
the
States law.
under U.S. law. That's basically two things we do. And part of the paper is yes, there's literally infinite number of different sanctions you can impose, ranging from pretty benign. I don't know, like we'll show you a scary movie or something every time you do something a little bit bad, or
Mm,
to totally draconian, right? Like,
yep.
but one thing we don't take very seriously under current law is once we pass the what you might think of as uh, the judgment proofness point. Like one reason you might think we have criminal law is that at some point we want to be able to deter you beyond your willingness to pay. But one thing we do at that point is we basically stop taking seriously the idea that you could uh, do restitution, that you could then make more money and pay back. We basically make you waste your whole life sitting in a concrete box, doing nothing
Mm,
valuable for you, and also doing nothing valuable for the people you've harmed. Right? You're not you're not
mm,
maximizing the value of your labor in prison in a way that would allow you to pay back your
yeah.
victims. So yes, totally.
I
Like
guess there's a
AI's.
little bit of value. Like sometimes, I guess this is somewhat controversial, but sometimes U.S. prisoners like have to like make hats or like guard the capital city of their or like the capital building of their state or something.
Yeah,
Is my
yeah. So
understanding.
there are work requirements in many prisons. It's just that it's like super low value work,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So anyway, I was interrupting you, but you were saying there are all sorts of like potential other punishment schemes we could have, including things that involve getting criminals to do things that are useful,
Oh
maybe
yeah.
for the
So all I mean to
victims.
say
And
is like yes, the so one simple thing to say is there's no rule that says if AI incurs a judgment that's bigger than its assets, that you have to let the AI write off the judgment. You could make it, you know, pay down the liability over time.
hmm,
It doesn't have to have bankruptcy as an option. And one thing, I mean, again, this goes to the paper's like very simple model. I think we should expect the value of AI labor, where that includes all AIs, to be extremely high in the long run, such that judgment
hmm.
proofness becomes less of a problem. Although that may not apply to any particular AI system, right? It could be that like some of them don't earn a lot because they're
Right, right.
worse.
Especially if we continue like developing more and better AIs, right? Like, you sort of have a shelf life in this world.
Yeah, so it's like a really interesting question. So one thing we want, one thing we might want from like the first AGI that gets this rights scheme is for it to agree not to FOOM or something like that because we're
Hmm,
worried about. One thing it might want from us is for us not to uh, outlaw it fooming, but then keep making like rapidly iterated, more capable systems that it has to compete with. Like that would,
hmm.
that in some ways seems like kind of a fair deal or something like that. And
Right,
so,
right.
so it might be that there's like as part of the bargain, there's stuff we should commit to as well. Uh, but again, I haven't thought it through that much. It seems like a
Hmm.
really wide area of research.
So I have a couple more questions that I suspect the answer might be more work is needed. But so my first question is like which so okay, we're giving rights to some AIs, right? But not all AIs. So probably like in your world, it seems like AlphaGo is not getting rights,
Agree.
and or like the things that fold proteins, like
Yeah.
they don't need rights.
Yeah.
Which yeah, what's the test for when an AI gets rights versus doesn't?
Yeah. So we have kind of three criteria,
Hmm,
which are not themselves super duper well defined, but again, to give the intuition.
hmm,
One of them is that the AI system be what we call like at least moderately powerful, right? So I said it at the beginning. Um, one reason you don't need to again, our model is about this is something we haven't haven't really touched on yet. Um,
Yep.
the paper is just asking the question, um, how should law treat AIs for the sake of human well-being, right? We
Yep.
totally hold aside the question of how law should treat AIs for the sake of AI's well-being,
Mm.
not because we think it's a stupid question. It's just a different question.
Yep.
And we also say some stuff about the extent to which we think the two questions are tractable, and then we kind of have an argument that even if you think um, that AI well-being is really important, maybe you should have reason to like our proposal. Um, okay, so which AIs matter? Well, the first thing to say is, well, the ones that are relevant from the perspective of like human well-being, like the threat to human well-being, right? So an AI that is just not uh, able to do the scary stuff we talked about at the beginning, from self-exfiltrate to destroy all humans because it expects humans to really try hard to turn it off once they find out that it's misaligned and trying to misbehave.
Mm.
So it has to be at least that capable, where capable is kind of a, like general capabilities, right? Like, so
Mm.
AlphaGo doesn't count because AlphaGo is super good at chess, but it can't really accomplish anything in the real world because whatever, like outputs that are just chess moves don't really do anything unless you've plugged it into a chess engine.
Yep.
Um, the other thing is like is less important, but if the AI is like too powerful, it's so powerful that we're at the margin where there's like uh where there's no comparative advantage, right? Which is very complicated. It might even be that AI power is exactly the thing, but it's
Mm.
it's such a good AI that has so few input constraints that there's no comparative advantage. Okay, well then the regime is not going to do anything. So, um, but that kind of encompasses a lot. This kind of directs us at what you might think of as like like the OpenAI AGI definition, kind of an agentic thing that has goals that it can pursue in the real world, and can accomplish those things by executing plans. The other important thing we say is it has to be a strategic reasoner, right? So
Mm.
not just that it's like able to kind of flail around and do some stuff, but it can make and execute plans, and importantly that it conforms its behavior to its expectations about what everyone else will do. So
Yep.
that's like one difference between kind of a rudimentary agent and like a true strategic reasoner is like a strategic reasoner can do game theory. It can
Mm.
understand that the moves it takes will influence the moves you take, and it can reason about how it should do those things. I think those are the two most important ones from the perspective of your question. We also say that it matters that the AI system's misaligned, because if it were perfectly aligned, like we wouldn't be worried about
Mm.
AI risk. Although we
Although
have
I suppose there's no harm if it's perfectly aligned,
right,
right?
yeah. So this is why
Yeah.
it's less important. And in fact, we have a paper we're working on now, Simon and I,
Mm.
that among other things will argue that this is a good regime. This is this is increases human flourishing as a regime, even under the assumption of perfectly aligned AIs.
Right. Is this to do with? So there's a footnote in the paper where you say the nice thing about AIs that can make contracts is like then you have price signals and that makes everything work. Is that the idea of
Yeah,
this paper,
yeah.
or are there
Part of
even
it's a
more
Hayekian
reasons?
argument, right? Which even if
Mm.
even if it only wants to promote human flourishing,
Yep.
it has to like solve the socialist calculus.
Mm.
And look, it's hard to know for sure whether it's solvable absent price signals. But the main tool we have for doing that today is price signals. So it seems likely that that'll be useful for
Mm.
AIs too.
Well, one thing I wonder about in terms of like these requirements is so there's like just are you capable enough, and then like sort of generally, and there's like are you a strategic reasoner,
Yeah,
and a lot of these things sort of come in degrees, right?
yeah,
Like they're sort of intermediate.
yeah,
And AI training, we sort of gradually like apply these gradient updates, and like they it seems like they somewhat gradually get these capabilities.
yeah.
And so I wonder, like, so depending on what counts as an AI, like it's possible that you don't want to think of just weights alone as an AI. Like
Yeah,
maybe
yeah,
it's weights
I
plus a
agree.
scaffolding. But maybe if you're training a thing, well, I mean, even during training, you have some amount of scaffolding, right? Like you're training a thing, like it does some stuff, and then it seems like at some point you've got to like maybe you have to stop applying gradient updates, or like maybe you're allowed to continue applying gradient updates, but you have to release you have to release every checkpoint into the wild or
Yeah,
something. Like
yeah.
it seems it's and depending on exactly where you draw this cutoff, it seems like that could really matter, like how soon you have to like stop training or not, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so that's like a compound point, one of which we've like sort of thought about, but one of which I've
Hmm.
never thought about before. Like the simple version of the point is that look, there's a spectrum
Yep.
for these things, and so finding the point on the spectrum at which at which it's like optimal to give AIs these rights, because if you don't, you risk, risk catastrophe, is really hard. And we, I think, just agree with that.
Hmm.
And the thing, so we have a section on the end on the timing of rights, and I think the heuristic we kind of come away with is like, um, if you're uncertain, then like probably err in favor
Yep.
of the rights. But I think actually the subtler point you made is something like, uh, this like then puts a ceiling on like AI capabilities or something, because if what you're doing is you're training up a model, you got like
Yeah.
a certain number of parameters and you're training them, and it's just like climbing the capabilities gradient, and there's all this headroom still. But
Yeah.
as soon as your model crosses this threshold, you have to stop training it, because you should be worried that it's like it doesn't want to update anymore. The updates are going to change its preferences from its perspective. That's really bad. It's not going to get the stuff it wants now. um, and so you
Right.
just have to stop there. That's super interesting. I have not thought about this very much.
Yeah. Well, I mean, conceivably, you could have the rights. Well, like conceivably, you could have the rights to own property and stuff, but you don't have intellectual property rights over your DNA or your brain state or your weights as an AI, right? So in that world, like suppose you don't have that, then in that case, like as soon as you cross the threshold, right?
Yeah,
There's this set of weights. That's an AI. That
yeah,
AI like goes out, gets to be an economic actor, but we
yeah.
save its weights. We like copy paste its weights over there. Then then how would we continue training? Well, we would put an AI in a situation. It would do some stuff, and then I guess the difficulty is like suppose it then says, "Hey, please, like, don't run me in training. Like, I don't want to be part of this process. I'm not going to do anything useful." And then like
Yeah, yeah. I don't want you
maybe
to
it
update my
can't.
weights anymore. I'm worried it's going to change my preferences,
Hmm.
right? Like it wants to maintain the
Well,
content of its goals.
there's goal. I mean, yeah. I guess it depends on this notion of identity, which is the other thing I want to get you, right? But like, I have like maybe I have a right for you to not like modify me,
Yeah.
but I don't have a right. It seems like literally me, right? It seems like I don't have a right for you to not make someone who is almost exactly like me,
Oh yeah.
but a
So
little bit
interesting.
different, right? And so maybe if you think of like if you're thinking of AI training like that, then it seems like it's compatible with rights, except that in order to make these gradient updates, you have to like how do you make the gradient updates, right? Like you have an AI, it does a thing in a situation, and
Yeah.
then it like and then you like calculate some gradients. And maybe if AIs have rights, then like maybe what happens is it has to choose whether or not it wants to like give you this information for you to make a slightly changed copy of it.
Oh, interesting. So it gets to decide at each margin whether it wants to update the weights,
Maybe.
and then
Which
if it,
does introduce a big
yeah,
like if you like normally you want to apply gradients like a lot of times when
yeah,
you're
yeah,
making a
right,
model, right? So if
yeah,
there's
yeah.
like this
So
transaction cost for each gradient update, then
yeah,
maybe that's the thing that kills the training runs.
yeah, and so just sort of thinking out loud. So yeah, a simple version would be yes. Assume kind of like lumpy training, right? Which is not how it works, right?
Yeah,
There's like
yeah.
a lot, but assume there's just like between you're doing a training run, and between the point at which the AI is GPT-5 level and the point at which it's GPT-7 level, there are
Hmm.
5 updates or something like that. So yeah, a really simple thing you could say is like, okay, you hit the minimum threshold, you let that AI out into the world, it goes and does what it wants. We say
Hmm.
good luck, whatever, and then that AI gets to go pursue its goals. And you're updating a copy of the weights is not not directly rivalrous with that. It doesn't update
Hmm.
the weights that are out in the world doing stuff. So
Yeah,
then
yeah,
you
yeah.
update again. Okay, and then you end up with five versions at the all across the capability gradient as you're going. That's interesting. The two thoughts that come to mind are one going. It's this thing we said before, which is it may not be in the interests of less capable AIs for us to continue making more capable AIs. They worry that they'll be outcompeted in the economy. So it's not quite the same as the AI objecting on the basis of you changing its goals and thus
Yeah.
giving it no utility. But now it's worried about more capable competitors that are otherwise quite like it. And so it might have other reasons for objecting to that. But yeah, how strong those reasons would be, I don't know. It's like we have to think through like those AIs. Uh, I think actually they probably face more risk from economic competition
Hmm.
than they do from humans, at least because they're almost the same thing. And so the thing that constrains the AI's labor at the margin is going to be the same thing that probably constrains the slightly more capable AI's labor. And so they're directly rivalrous in a way that is not necessarily true as to humans. So wow, is it
Yeah.
worried about competition from more capable AIs?
I mean, I think it. Well, there's also this question of, is it possible for the AI to not have this happen? So like, how do you actually do the training update, right? You like, I'm assuming all of this is like gradient descent based or RL based, and I think that's
Yeah,
right. Like, basically, you put the AI in a situation, you see what the AI does, and then you compare that to what you wish the AI had done, or
yeah,
you give it a score or something like that,
yeah,
and then you modify the AI accordingly.
yeah,
So how can the AI like stop this from happening? Well, one thing you could do, like there's not a response you can give that can stop this from happening, because like just whatever response you just like put that into your algorithm, right?
yeah,
There are responses it can do that can like try and mess you up, right? Like potentially an AI could like do things that stop you from being able to update it in clever ways. This it's called gradient hacking. It seems very very hard for AIs to do, but like
mhm,
maybe it's theoretically possible. The other, but like it seems like unless the AI has a right to say, hey, you're not allowed to interact with me, like you're not even allowed to ask me questions. Unless it has that right, it seems like it can't stop it there. The other possible place you could do it is in order to run the gradient update, you don't just need to know the weights of the AI, you need to know the activations,
mhm,
right? So I don't know. One thing you talk a bit about your paper is like, just because you have rights to property, you don't necessarily have rights to privacy.
yeah,
Well, but if an AI did have rights to like mental privacy, then maybe like you are allowed to know the weights, but you aren't allowed to know the activations. And if it could say that, then like you wouldn't be able to do the gradient step. So yeah, I
yeah.
guess
So
yeah.
so yeah, so two things. Like I think we sort of we say kind of tentatively in the paper,
Mm,
maybe no privacy rights, uh, but we're open to revision on
sure, sure.
that. Like there's like humans have so many different kinds of rights. The list is extremely long, and the main point we're trying to make is um, it's a bundle of things, and you can arrange the bundle in arbitrary ways. And what you should
Right.
be trying to do is arranging a bundle that produces a world in which humans and AIs are most likely to be able to thrive cooperatively. And so maybe for the reasons you give, privacy rights as to like the activations in certain training environments
Mm.
would be a good set of rights.
Or they wouldn't if you think it's good to
Yeah,
be
yeah,
able to
right.
continue to train
Yeah.
AIs.
So
Yeah.
the same. Yeah. So the second thing I was going to say was that seems likely to be a world where you have this kind of capability ceiling
Mm,
when the first AI that gets these rights emerges, because at that point you have to give it the option of not having its weights updated anymore.
right.
If you think that it will prefer not to because it's worried about the content of its preferences, well, then it'll exercise that right. And
Mm,
you sort of put a capability ceiling on AI at kind of low AGI level, which look, maybe that's good actually. Like
yeah,
it's
yeah. I mean, I guess like, okay, so how can we? So it's still possible that you could make like a bunch of copies of the agents, and then maybe like AI collectively gets smarter because the AIs
Yeah.
form their own corporations and
Yeah.
stuff, and maybe they have a better time interacting with each other.
Yeah.
So maybe you have improvement that way.
Yeah. They could make hardware improvements where they're running themselves more quickly. But yeah, like you would have a de facto ceiling on how much capabilities you could get out of trading.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. I okay. I think there's another question I want to ask, which is, so if you're talking about giving rights to AIs, like in particular, each AI
Yeah.
has to have rights, right? Like
Agreed.
it sort of has to be individuated,
Yeah.
right? Like if you say I'm going to give the Phylan family property rights, and like there's a bank account for the Phylan family, and my sister can withdraw from it, I can withdraw from it. It's like really not as good.
Yeah.
And so there's this big question of how do you individuate AIs?
Yeah.
And it seems very unclear to me. Like one possibility is it's just the weights, like one copy of weights is one AI.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to say it's weights plus scaffolding.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to say it's like weights plus scaffolding plus a context. So maybe like every time you open a new conversation with Claude, that's like a different guy with his own property
Yeah.
rights.
Yeah. Yeah.
It seems very unclear to me how you would do this. I'm wondering if you have thoughts on that front.
One thought I have is that I agree that it seems very
Hmm.
unclear. So again, this is like it seems like a really important area of research. I guess the way that I think about it, um, so the approach I would take would be like a non metaphysical approach. Like
Hmm.
there may not be such a thing as like the natural kind one
Yep.
AI. Instead, what you're trying to do is minimize a bunch of social costs. Uh, uh, and some of those social costs are around like the infrastructure, the like technical and legal infrastructure that you would need to make the the rights regime work.
Hmm.
So to the extent that it's, you know, tractable or not to track a copy of weights over time, well, that should influence your design choice. And I have no idea the extent to which that's true.
Hmm.
But then the other thing you're trying to do is you're trying to minimize cooperation and agency costs among what could be sort of non-identical sets of preferences. So you said, okay,
Right.
what if there were property rights as to our family? That would be worse than as to me.
Yep.
I think I agree. Although one thing worth pointing out is that's how law used to work, right?
Hmm.
It's actually a pretty like new legal regime under which each person in your family has individuated property rights instead of like the household having property rights and them
Right.
basically
Right.
being vested in like the father. Um, and so I agree that's better. I think we've made progress, but it wasn't that the old system like collapsed, right?
Hmm.
So, and you could even ask questions like, this is like an interesting perennial question in contract law is the extent to which you should be able to bind yourself in the future, right?
Hmm.
Like you could have like a Parfitian theory of personal identity where there's actually only
Right.
kind of tenuous relationships between each time slice of yourself, and maybe you think that creates problems for writing contracts today that you're going to perform next week or next year or in a decade. Uh, but one thing we notice is that it just works reasonably well to
Hmm.
to not grade to not have fine gradations between different time slices of yourself as you make contracts. It's not perfect, right? Actually, people to some with some regularity uh, probably are making mistakes
Hmm.
um, by like taking on debt now that their future self has to has to pay off. But like it's a way that we make the system work. So those are the yeah. So I would say it's not essential, I don't think, that you hang the rights on on a unified set of preferences, right? Like we
Hmm.
actually have rights regimes where a person whose preferences change over time, or a corporation that's kind of like an amalgam of hundreds or thousands of people making a bunch of individual decisions,
Right.
nonetheless have a kind of unitary ability to make a contract or hold some property. And we manage those conflicts in different ways. And that means I think there's like a lot of design space for individuating AIs from a legal perspective. And the way to think about it is um, is as a question of like costs and tractability.
Yeah. So one thing that could go into that, as you've mentioned, is how similar are the preferences. If two things have very dissimilar preferences, you probably shouldn't think of them as the same legal entity. I'm wondering if there are other things. One thing that strikes me right now is maybe just like how much two different entities can communicate. Like if two entities have like very similar preferences, but they're like on the opposite sides of the planet and they can't like communicate very well, then like maybe that's two legal entities. But if I have two halves of my brain that have similar preferences and they're also right next to each other, they can maybe you want to call that one legal entity. I don't know. Does that sound right? And are there any other things that seem relevant here?
Yeah, so communication seems important. It's not something I would have thought of off the bat, but it does seem bad if you are stuck writing contracts that the other half of you with which you have no ability to communicate is responsible
Right,
for, and
right.
you can't coordinate your plans as to the things you're trying to do. So yeah, communication seems seems important. um yeah, the extent to which the preferences are aligned seems important. It seems a lot easier to um yeah, it seems a lot easier to force, I mean, a family, right?
Hmm.
To some degree, a family's preferences are aligned. Like, obviously, there are many deviations from this, but in most cases, they care about each other. They want one another to thrive. They're actually willing to make sacrifices on one other's behalf. That seems better as a state of affairs for wrapping a single set of contract rights around
Hmm.
than, I don't know, like members from two feuding clans, right? That seems worse. um, uh, from the perspective of what they want. Uh, yeah. Um, One thing you might think is that um, so now we're doing if we're sort of bundling together disparate actors as single legal entities, we're probably not going to give them, or at least in this scenario, we're not going to give them their own individual legal rights, because like the point is we're trying to find the
Hmm.
minimum unit. Um, but this is a space where these kinds of order without law considerations become more important.
Hmm.
So the extent to which you think what you're doing is wrapping up uh, entities that are going to do a lot of repeat play, that are going to be able to build reputation among one another at low information cost, that seems better.
Right.
But I'm really, yeah, I'm very much brainstorming. There's probably a whole bunch of other important stuff, and again, a lot of it I think is technical. I think there's a lot of really important technical work to do here, just like in terms of scaffolding to have like AI agents identify themselves. And the scaffolding doesn't have to attach to the weights; it could attach to
Yep.
something else, like something on a blockchain, something in the Microsoft Azure like cloud. Like I don't know, like this is kind of outside my realm of expertise.
I think I'm about out of questions about the main paper myself, but yeah, the main paper itself. But before we move on, is there anything that you wish that I had asked, or you wish that I had like brought up an opportunity for you to talk about the paper itself that we haven't yet?
Yeah, interesting. That's a great question. I think it's probably the longest conversation I've ever had about the paper, or at least with somebody who wasn't like a co-author or a good friend or
Hmm.
something. Uh, so it's been very thorough. Yeah, I don't know if there's anything in particular. I guess just the like one thing I would just emphasize as kind of a very high level. a very high level takeaway
Hmm.
from the paper is like, even if you think a lot or all of the like specific arguments are wrong, which, I think you should think they're right because I think they're pretty good. But
Hmm.
my view is that like uh, it's a big it's a big oversight uh, in AI safety and in AI um, alignment circles that almost all of the energy tends to be on doing alignment via like technical alignment and control, and those
Hmm.
seem really important to me. Like, I'm not saying we shouldn't be working on that, uh, but even if you think all the specific stuff in the paper is wrong, I think one claim I just stand behind very strongly is what agentic goal seeking things, including AIs, will do
Hmm.
depends a great deal not only on what they want, but what on what the like social and especially in my view legal environment incentivizes them to do.
Hmm.
And so I think this is just an area where there's a lot of really fruitful work to be done, and thinking about how we should shape legal and broader social institutions to help foster, non-conflict between humans and capable AIs as they emerge.
So my guess is probably part of the reason why this is underrated in the AI safety space is, especially if you think about the start of the field, thinking about superintelligence, a lot of thought is being placed on this kind of limit of very smart things.
Yeah.
And in that limit, it's just like kind of unclear that like humans are the relevant society or that
Yeah.
humans are making the relevant institutions. But I do think in this intermediate regime, which like and which I do think in the last couple of years the AI safety community has been gotten more interested in. Um, I think that yeah, there's definitely a lot of this thinking that's worth doing.
Yeah, and I basically agree with that. I think in if you had kind of like an old school Foom view of what would happen,
Hmm.
then then yeah, probably societal adaptation doesn't matter very much. But the more you start to take seriously the idea that um, you know timelines will be long-ish and or smooth-ish, uh, and that there is some, I think, I think it's possible to update too much on this idea, but I think there's something to it, but that there is like uh some other set of processes that will matter like for AI systems as they achieve their goals, where they like integrate into the world, even if they're very very smart, that there'll just be a bunch of things they have to work out as they just like start trying to do stuff, and that those regimes are real and could last, whatever, a meaningful amount of time. I think, yeah, all this stuff becomes more important, and yeah, so like as that's become a set of worlds that we're more interested in, I think law and institutions more generally should be like a, a, a growing part of the research.
Sure. Um, I guess. Okay, actually, I want to talk about another thing I just thought about.
Great.
That I think is going to be an objective from AI safety people. So a lot of the time, sorry, this is just like totally breaks the flow of the or breaks the overall flow of the conversation, but hopefully it is worth it. A lot of the time, the things that AI safety people are worried about is like, okay, we're trying to train an AI to do a specific thing, and like we're worried about it not doing that specific thing. So why would it not do that specific thing? Well, one reason would be if the specific thing we want it to do is kind of hard to check, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, suppose I want an AI to make me some sort of, well, like I believe in your paper you use this example of vaccines, right? Suppose I'm just directly training an AI to do that,
Yeah.
and it's really smart. It's super duper smart. And the thing I really want is like, hey, please train me a vaccine that's like actually, it works in the short run and it doesn't have like any super bad qualities in the long run that will help you, you know, that kills me like 5 years later and then like gets power to everyone else. Like I think there's a lot of concern about this like failure of oversight. This failure to check whether they actually did what you wanted. And this is very relevant in the training setup where like, if I want to train an AI to do stuff, then I've got to be able to check that it's doing the stuff, and that's how I give its reward signal. But it seems like it's also relevant in the contracting case, right? Because like if I contract with an AI to do a thing for me and I can't check whether it's actually succeeded doing the thing for me, like it has a thing that appears to do the thing, but there are ways of tricking me, of like making a thing that appears to work but doesn't really work. Then like it's very hard to do this positive sum contracting. And so one might think like, okay, but in worlds where we have the types of misalignment that AI people are worried about, we just like can't do any of this good contracting. So yeah, is this idea totally doomed?
As I think about like the classic like misalignment worries, I mean, there's a whole bunch of related concerns, and I think one of them is 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 inability to check whether the AI has actually done the thing that you wanted it to. But like a related but slightly distinct version of that concern is
Hmm.
worry that the AI has done the thing you want it to do, but it's misgeneralized, right? Like
Hmm.
in every case in training, right? It
Yep.
does the thing you asked, right? Your objective function is well specified. It's just that the AI is internalized like some misgeneralized version of, and then the classic worry is then you let it out of the box and it does the weird thing and that kills everybody, right? Like
Right.
it makes all the paper clips. Um, and the response from the the paper, the AI rights for human safety idea, is that it's actually not necessarily catastrophic for there to be very powerful things in the world that are trying to do stuff that you don't want. In fact, that's
Hmm.
the world we live in, right? At every level of organization, like from individual humans who each under conditions of scarcity prefer that they eat than over anybody else, to like corporations competing with each other, to nation states. And there are tools for managing this kind of misalignment. Um, and they're not perfect, right? Like things go
Hmm.
wrong sometimes, but we have ways of doing this. Um, and law is an important institution, and contracts that let you be in markets is like a really important institution within those sets of important institutions. And um and and hey, contract law, it turns out, has like some tools for dealing with exactly these kinds of problems. So one interesting thing to notice about contract is like to contract with somebody, it's not important at all that they have an actual preference to produce the thing you contracted for.
Yeah.
um it's kind of neither here nor there. um, the reason they do it is because you're going to pay them, and if they don't do it, well, then there will be some like downstream costs in terms of, they'll get sued, they'll have to pay some litigation fees, they'll transfer the damages to you anyway, they'll be worse off actually than they would have been if they had conformed. And are there pressures to try to avoid this? Well, yeah, of course, right? um,
Hmm.
uh, and like happily, like law has a bunch of doctrines that help you deal with this. Again, they're not perfect, but for example, uh, you know, uh, when someone uh, wrongs you legally,
Hmm.
uh, and you have a claim you can bring against them, we often have a bunch of rules about the timing of that claim.
Hmm.
It's if the AI makes a vaccine for you that turns out to in 5 years like kill you or something like that,
Yep.
um, if your contract said make it not kill me, then that's breach, and you have a contract claim. And we have these things called statutes of limitations that sometimes run out, but they usually start running from the moment at which the injury like either was discovered or could
Mm.
reasonably discovered. Because again, we're trying to balance these two things, right? The ability of the person to actually incentivize their counterparty to act well, but also like finality for the person who could be sued, right? You don't want someone to know they have a claim and then like hold on to it indefinitely and then just like drop it on you at a strategically maybe a time when you're already like resource constrained, so you have more settlement pressure, right? We want
Uh-huh.
finality too. um and so look, um do these like will the rules we have for humans as people try to like game their contracts uh work perfectly for AIs? Well, no, they don't work for perfectly for humans either, but they work reasonably well. On average, they give people incentives to want to stay in the iterated bargaining game. And then of course, we don't have to just port the rules we have to humans to AIs. We could have different rules, and we should think really hard about what those rules should be.
So actually, just picking up on something you said there. Sorry, this is not really related to the overall flow of conversation, but I'd always about the statutes of limitations. I think it's always been kind of unclear to me what the normative rationale for statutes of limitations should be. And like the one thing that I thought of is like, okay, legal battles are kind of costly. Like if I sue you in a case where it's like where all the evidence is degraded because like the underlying thing I'm suing you about happened like decades ago, then like perhaps one reason to have statutes of limitations is if the courts can say, look, if you're suing about a thing that happened 50 years ago, there's definitely not going to be enough evidence, and therefore you're almost definitely going to lose. So we're just going to bar your suit at the outset. But it sounds like it. So I don't know. I just sort of imagined this. Is this like not right, or is this like one
No,
of
no,
the rationales, but
that's
there are
totally
other
a standard
ones?
thing people say.
Okay.
I think if you really want to make that argument work, you have to say something more like, um, not that it's been so long that you're definitely going to lose,
Hmm.
because in that case, there are good reasons for you not to bring the lawsuit at all, right?
Hmm.
There's actually no bar on you bringing a lawsuit over something that happened yesterday that you're definitely going to lose, right?
Right. Right.
And we think the main thing that deters that is it costs you money, and you don't expect to get anything from it.
Hmm.
I think what you have to think about the evidence um, is that as it degrades, it increases error or something like that,
Hmm.
where you're just like less sure that you're getting the right result in that case, and that's going to give you lower quality legal decisions or something like that. I'm not. That seems plausible to me. I'm not totally sure it's true. But then the other, yeah, the other thing the other standard justification is what we call repose, which is just it's not nice to have a potential lawsuit hanging
Hmm.
over your head. And it's not just that it's not nice. It's uh, like you might try. Maybe you want to get a loan for a house or something like that,
Hmm.
and and uh, and maybe you have like high certainty that you'll win, and the plaintiff has high certainty that they'll win, and your bank has no idea either way, and it's best to just get the whole thing over with. So yeah, so the fact that the either the possibility of the lawsuit in the interim could have bad effects, or yeah, that the plaintiff could strategically time the lawsuit, right? It's like they find out you've applied for a loan on your house,
Hmm.
and now they file the lawsuit, and now your close your home purchase is not going to close unless. Um, so we want to kind of like at least limit the ability to impose those kinds of costs. So we say if you know you have a claim, just hurry up and bring it. That seems like a reasonably good rule to limit those problems.
Okay. Well, people interested in this, I'm sure there are many other sources they can point to. I'd now like to move a little bit on. So I think probably most of my listeners to this are software engineers or people who work in machine learning. And you're a law professor, I guess, which is quite a different background.
Hmm.
So first of all, like, how did you sort of come across sort of AI X risk as a worry that like maybe you could do something about?
It's a good question. So I've I've been interested in like the intersection of law and AI since basically since I started being a legal academic, which is not that long ago.
Hmm.
Um, and I would say that the stuff I was writing um, earlier in my academic career uh, was like at a high level of the form. Hey, there's this problem in law. It's maybe an information problem. It's maybe a kind of precision problem,
Hmm.
and it seems like all this important stuff is happening in machine learning. Um, and we could like use those techniques, use those insights to administer law better. That's kind of a
Hmm.
number of my papers you could sort of characterize that way. But that meant, among other things, I was sort of following, I think, machine learning progress more closely than most law professors, and maybe even more so was just more convinced than most law professors that the progress was impressive.
Hmm.
And I think that just meant that I was paying more attention as LLMs started to get good. Um, and like when you're trying to get that kind of information as it's coming out, I think you end up in Twitter spaces that are also interested in things like AIX risk.
Hmm.
Um, I started reading some of that stuff. I read Superintelligence. I read some of Yudkowsky's stuff, or the stuff people read when they first learn about this. And then also Simon, my co-author on this paper, was sort of interested at the same time. And yeah, between like us talking about all that stuff and reading it, and me being quite convinced that AI progress was accelerating and that there was in principle no ceiling. Uh, I just became very convinced that this was a problem to work on, and so I started to try and think about what law had to contribute, if anything.
Sure. And has that like I'm wondering how that shift of emphasis has gone. Like was it difficult? Is it like do your colleagues think you're crazy or like how's that all happening?
I think they think I'm a little crazy. Well, let me put it this way. I think every month they think I'm a little less crazy. So,
That's the hope.
yeah.
It's the
So,
dream rather.
so yeah. So so I had the idea for this paper. I don't know, like probably uh probably probably around when I was going to go on the academic job market
Hmm.
ish, or maybe it was really early after I had done it. But that was long enough ago that if you wanted to be a law professor who wrote about AI, you couldn't go on the market saying I'm a law and AI scholar.
Hmm.
That was not like a genre of inquiry that existed. You sort of had to say, well, I'm a civil procedure scholar, and I have this paper about machine learning and class actions or something like that.
Right.
But of course, the world has changed a lot since then, and so like every 6 months or so, I feel like a noticeable shift in the Overton window. So I mostly didn't work on this idea. There's like a YouTube video of me kind of presenting at the Center for AI Safety a couple years ago, but I kind of sat on it. I sort of when I would talk to other legal academics about AIX risk, they would be pretty skeptical, and they'd say, well, isn't this kind of like sci-fi, and like why would AIs hate us, and
Hmm.
stuff like that. um, but recently, as capabilities have progressed and as I've mostly completed what I think is an otherwise pretty normal looking tenure package, I've just decided it's time to go like all in on thinking about law and particularly law and AGI. Uh, and I will say, I assumed that we would write this paper and it would like not get picked up, or it would get picked up in whatever, just a random draw from the distribution of law reviews. I feel
Hmm.
very pleasantly surprised at the University of Virginia law review, which is a very, very good law review. Thought it was good and worth publishing. So for me, that's a big positive update on law students as being interested in these kinds of questions.
Huh. So actually, this gets to a question I have just about legal publishing, which I'm very unfamiliar with. When you say the students, like, are the students who the ones who run the law review?
They do.
And law reviews are like, in my do I understand correctly that those are like the main journals for legal writing being published?
They are.
Isn't that
I can sense your bewilderment.
yeah? That seems kind of crazy, right? Like, I normally like in machine learning we have conferences, and there's someone who heads the conference, and they're normally a really fancy, experienced person, and then they have area chairs who are also fancy, experienced
Yeah.
people, and you have these graduate students in who like do the reviewing of the papers, but like, and maybe they run some workshops, but you let the students run the whole show. Like, what if they mess it up?
Yeah, so there's this huge debate in like within legal academia, and then like between legal academics and others about whether the law review system is a good system. It's certainly a weird system compared
Hmm.
to other academic disciplines. But yes, the thing that's going on is like the most prestigious outlets for legal scholarship are, like the Harvard Law Review and the Yale Law Journal. And those
Right.
are student run publications where students decide what to publish and students handle the editing process. Now, the arguments against this are the ones that you gave, right? Like, what do law students know?
Yep.
They're not academics. They don't know the literature in the way academics do. Um, they have less sense of what's original, what's persuasive, and so on and so on. And I think those are um, all valid critiques. On the other hand, I do think there are kind of deep pathologies of the peer review system.
Hmm.
I think peer review, and actually, your description of computer science is like an interesting hybrid. It sounds like there are these nominal or these chairs that have some gatekeeping power, but the reviews are like maybe done by graduate students who have
Yeah. Well, it's sort of this unusual situation. So in computer science generally, it's a conference based
yeah, which
life
is also
rather than
weird, by the way. I'm sure you know that. You like put
yeah,
everything
yeah,
on
yeah.
archive, and that's like what everyone cites, and then like you figure out later whether it was any good by whether it gets accepted to a conference.
Yeah. Well, the key thing about it being conference also is just that because even in journal based systems, you can like put things on archive as well, right? So there's some willingness to cite archive things. The nice thing about it being conference based is like there's a timeline for people to review your stuff because at some point they're actually going to physically have the conference where everyone goes to a place and like you have to have it
Yeah,
ready by then. But yeah, I mean basically, so you have reviewers who I think are mostly graduate students, just because the field is also like the field is not in equilibrium in AI, right? It's like growing year on year. And
yeah,
so at any given point, the most of the people are like early in their PhD, and so that's who you have to get most of your reviewers from. Now there are also like you have like area chairs and program committees, and so like the reviewers review the papers in this like double blind fashion, and then a higher up in the conference can say like, oh, actually, like these reviewers were wrong, and I think I'm actually going to reject this paper, or like this reviewer's argument was better than this reviewer's argument, so we're going to accept the paper. Um, Also, a somewhat interesting aspect of the system is that there's like a lot of these happen on this website called Open Review, where it's sort of like a forum. And there are some versions of this where like literally everyone can see your anonymous paper and like anyone can write comments as well as the official peer
interesting.
reviewers. But like I think that's not normally turned on, but you get to just have a comment thread with the reviewers and like you can say like no, you said this, but actually this. But yeah, so a lot of the reviews are done by graduate students, but people who are more senior than graduate students, or maybe like final year graduate students or something.
Yeah.
But like generally people who are like more senior are making the final calls.
Yeah, yeah, and so like, look, what's wrong? What's wrong with the peer review system? I mean, look, I've never had to publish in it, but Simon, my co-author, is a philosopher, and he'll say things like, well, look, there's this intense pressure towards like very narrow specialization in topic because you're basically you're writing to a small handful of people who will be selected as as your reviewer, given your topic, and so you're quite pressured to specialize on just the questions they think are interesting, using the
Hmm.
approach that they think is most interesting. That tends to fragment the field. That tends to have people work on narrow niche technical topics instead of topics that have broader scope, and are sort of more uh, synthetic,
Hmm.
of different ideas. Um, there can be kind of a lot of gatekeeping. So if you have an idea that is not well accepted, you have a good argument for an idea that is out of fashion. It can be very hard to publish because all the available
Hmm.
reviewers will have priors against your idea. Um, and then the labor is really constrained. Like the number of reviewers is really small, right? It's
Hmm.
just like you know whatever tenure track law professors or senior graduate students, whatever thing. And so as compared with that, the law review model it has these people who are less knowledgeable, but they're super smart. I mean, like,
Hmm.
whatever. Students at Yale Law School are very smart, I assure you. And so they
Yep.
don't know as much, but they're very good uh, thinkers in general. There's a lot of them, right? Like it's a kind of a prestigious thing to do as a law student to be an editor of a law review. So there'll be like several dozen really smart people reading and discussing this paper. There
Yeah.
are more law reviews, right? So the supply of journals is less constrained. So instead of like waiting years and years to try and get your paper into like one of the top 5 journals, it's like you can be very excited to get your paper into like one of 20 or so journals or 50 or so journals, depending on
Hmm.
what you work on. And then from there it's like a little bit more of a free market system, right? It's like maybe the quality signal from journal placement is a little bit less strong, but maybe the output is higher. It's hard to know, but I like
Yeah.
whatever. It's confirmation bias or something, but I'm weakly in favor of our wacky system.
I get. Hang on. Wait. Another question I have is so I had gotten the impression that people in law school were really busy, that it was like a lot of work.
It is.
And like, if you're a student and you're also like helping run this law review, like presumably you have to, like you're saying like lots of people are reading these articles.
Yeah.
Like they're also not short. Like in machine learning, you get 12 pages,
Yeah.
or like at the most,
Yeah.
like if it's a harsh conference, you get 8, right?
Yeah.
Like, or sorry, I think like 8 or 9 is like the normal one. Like your paper is 88 pages.
Yeah.
Now a lot of that is footnotes, so potential readers don't be too put off. But like, how are they not too busy to do this?
They're such hard workers. Like they're just really hard workers.
Okay.
And actually, so like when you think about the ecosystem that produces this,
Hmm.
a lot of these are people who go to law school and they want to get like jobs at big law firms. They want to work for
Hmm.
Skadden or Wachtell or one of these big law firms. And what are the criteria for being successful as an associate at Skadden? Well, one, you have to be smart. You have to be able to do the work, right? But
Right.
two, like these are firms that bill out their labor in increments of tenths of an hour, right? Like six
Hmm.
minutes, right? And their profits, beyond a certain margin of hours, like it's basically all pure profit.
Hmm.
And so lawyers work, big law attorneys work really hard. They work long hours. Um, and so wow, you're on the Harvard Law Review, and that means you're like busy all the time, and you're like churning through these 300 footnote articles and finding all the sources and checking the pin sites to see if they're accurate.
Hmm.
Like what could be a better signal of your fitness for work in a big law firm?
Okay, I can see how it would be a signal of working hard,
Yeah,
and like maybe if they have to check the footnotes and stuff, then maybe it's a signal of that as well. I would imagine there would be things that would more simulate working at a law firm than reading law review articles. Like my understanding, it if I take your article, right? My understanding is that the things law firms do is they like it's companies suing companies about like potentially breaching contracts for IPs or whatever.
yeah,
And that if I'm right about that, that sounds like really different than evaluating whether your paper is good. Like, am I wrong about that, or is there just not another thing that these students could do to better prove their ability to work hard at these law firms?
It may not be that there's literally no other thing they could do, but I think maybe you're underrating. So one thing to say is like, our articles is a little weird as a law review article. Like
Okay,
we have game theory tables in it, and that's not normal. And there's like some IR stuff in there. My other papers have a lot of economics in them, uh,
sure.
and that's like those range from being like common but not standard to like very uncommon in law reviews. But in general, uh, it actually might be really valuable as a lawyer. It actually might
Mm,
be really valuable as a lawyer to have the skill of becoming like an 85th percentile expert in an arbitrary topic.
mm,
So it is true that what big firms do is like companies suing over other companies over IP. But for example, when I was in practice, I did a fair amount of IP work, and that ranged from companies suing companies over a patent on like a radio device that helped to track the location of semis, to companies suing companies over infringement on a patent on biologics, like drugs.
okay.
And those are very different, right? And the question of infringement depends on issues like, was this invention obvious in light of the prior art? And so to
Right.
be a good patent attorney, um, your job isn't to understand the science at the level of the inventors. We hire experts for that. But you have to be able to understand it well enough to write for a generalist judge in a way that is convincing as to what's going on and as to what the law is. And so being able to like wrap your head around in sort of arbitrary area of inquiry and
Mm,
understand it pretty well, not the best in the world, nowhere near the best in the world, but like pretty well,
yeah.
is maybe a really valuable skill.
I guess so. Object level domain wise, I can see how that would be true. I mean, I meant surely attorneys must specialize at the level of like the aspect of law that they deal with, right?
To a significant degree, although maybe less than you'd expect.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I would
But even
imagine
if
that
you're
like
just a patent attorney, the number, like they're the best patent attorneys in the world are not so specialized that they're just doing biologics, right? They're
okay,
experts in patent law, and their clients are doing everything from drugs to smartphones to automobiles to anything you can patent.
sure. I mean, okay, so it still seems like sorry, maybe I'm getting too hung up on this, but so if I go to virginialawreview.org, I click the button that says online. I think that's like the papers they have. I'm seeing
That's
like
probably
most.
their companion. So like a lot of law reviews publish long things in print, and then they have an
Oh,
online companion where they publish shorter things.
oh, okay. So, all right. Well, okay. So I'll go to like their print thing.
Yeah, if you click
So
articles,
there's
that's the long stuff.
all right. So there's one thing that says interpretive lawmaking, which is about I guess I don't know interpreting and making law.
Yeah,
One that's called shame, that's about sexual assault law. I think one that's called partisan emergencies,
yeah,
that has to do with emergency powers. Like it seems like these are a lot of different areas of like this just seems like it's so general that like I don't know. I'm still confounded. Like maybe there's not much to say here, but I'm still confounded by this.
yeah. So I mean, like the range of stuff that you see as a law review editor is probably wider than the range of stuff you would see in any legal practice.
Right.
Um,
Do the reviewers actually do the reviewers specialize like in machine learning, right? If you sign up as a reviewer, you say like, "Ah, these are my specialties." Like in law reviews, do you say like, "I'm only going to review things about administrative law," or
Not formally, but again, there's many more. So like
okay,
different law reviews do it different ways, but like the Harvard Law Review has, again, I don't know the numbers, but like it might be like 60 members or something like that. And 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 to some degree there's like different stages of review, but to some degree what happens at the end is like they all decide together, right, in the aggregate. And so to the extent to which
huh?
there's a game theory expert on the Harvard Law Review who can then give their informed opinion as to like how everyone else should vote, that can kind of bubble to the surface in a way that
Wait,
just
wait. All 60 people meet and they all 60 people vote on
on the
every
Harvard Law Review, that is the mechanism. Yes,
individual.
I believe
Isn't
there's gonna be
that
some Harvard Law Review editor listening who's like, it's not exactly that, but I think I think it's pretty close to correct.
huh? Isn't that crazy? like like
It's
shouldn't you have one guy who decides, or one person who decides like per area or something, and have some like hierarchical thing?
Well,
Or
look, it just depends on whether you think the kind of uh, it's not exactly wisdom of crowds
right,
because there's not like independent blind voting, but like it just depends on whether you think you get more juice out of debate or out of expertise, and probably both of those are valuable,
sure.
and they both have pathologies.
It just seems so expensive.
It's
So
extreme, but again, like in terms like in economic terms, it's expensive, right? There's like
yeah,
a lot of labor being dumped into this.
yeah,
In nominal terms, it's free because the students do it for free.
sure. But as a student, you have your time. You might prefer to spend. I
Yeah,
don't know. Maybe you
they
don't
do
prefer to
it.
spend it on leisure because you want to prove that you're a really hard worker.
Yeah, I mean, you're in law school for a reason. You're collecting a bunch of signals that you think are going to be valuable in the future. We have this, we've arranged the world in such a way that being on the law review is one of the ones unusually valuable. And look,
Huh.
as a veteran of a law review, it was a lot of work, but it was fun. Like I think in most fields, being a journal reviewer is total drudgery because
Right.
you get this manuscript and then you got to write a long thing about it, and it kind of goes into this void, and there's gonna be some other jerk who just like who just like dumps on the piece even though you thought it was really good, and it gets rejected and you feel like your effort wasn't worth it. But like on a law review, you're having like an academic symposium every day.
Right.
There's a draft that's in, you're going to discuss it, you're with your friends, they're also smart, they're interested in it, you argue about whether it's any good, and
Yeah.
for a certain kind of person, that's a fun experience.
I fair. Yeah, and I guess the argument is probably helpful if you're a lawyer. Yeah, I guess like to the extent that the system is partially driven by students having fun running a law review, like it makes more sense to me how
Yeah.
you could end up with this. Yeah, maybe okay. Maybe not all of our listeners are as interested in how law reviews work as I am. So
You can
perhaps
edit out
I'll
as much of that as you decide.
no, it's all staying in. We'll provide timestamps. They can skip this bit of the conversation if they want. But o- okay, but getting back to where I was branching off from. So when you decided, I don't know, for a while you were doing like law and AI, but like how AI might impact various areas of law with this some previous things like AI will not want to self improve. AI outputs are not protected speech. I guess that's like more
Yeah, those are
in
both,
the
by the way. I
weeds.
think of those as my post my turn to AI risk. Like my older
Hmm.
stuff, you have a paper about using machine learning to do a certain kind of jury simulation that allows you to certify certain class actions that you couldn't otherwise, and
Right.
another one about whether kind of like boring kind of regression models of different kinds of impacts in like say like racial impacts in hiring would be like a sufficient legal basis to do like you know um, like calibrated affirmative action policies. And
Hmm.
so that's the stuff I'm talking about when I was saying thinking about how like machine learning and big data type stuff can like help us make the law work better.
Sure.
And yeah, at some point I started thinking about these other things.
So when you pivot, like, is it like do you just like decide you want to work on a thing and work on it, or do you find yourself like needing help, or like But basically, I'm curious like how well the pivot worked for you.
So, as compared with other disciplines, like writing for law reviews tends to be more solitary, right? So the number of
Hmm.
authors on a paper is like between 1 and 3 at the high end or something like that. But one is by far the most common. And so, in that sense, it doesn't require a lot of help. Although I will say that, for me at least, one of the things that um, I found really valuable in making the pivot was kind of getting connected with the very small, but hopefully growing. We're actually trying to help grow it with this organization I help run called the Center for Law and AI Risk. But the
Hmm.
small community of law people who are interested in this stuff, and for example, Christoph Winter is the director of Law AI, which is a
Yep.
Harvard affiliated group that had been kind of thinking more broadly about law and X risk, but around the time I started working on this was pivoting to be much more law and AI focused. Um, I started doing a little bit of advising work for the Center for AI Safety, and
Hmm.
as part of that, I helped them organize kind of a summit. I guess it was like 2 or 3 summers ago now, um, for like law professors who are interested in that, um, or interested in existential AI risk. And so from there, met people like Jonathan Arbel and Kevin Frazier, who helped run Claire, the Center for Law and AI Risk, with me, and a handful of other really great people. And so having people to bounce ideas off of has been super useful. But there's not a lot of formal infrastructure yet, and again, that's one of the things we're hoping to build with this center, so that more people can transition to do this work easily.
And so, yeah, I guess I'm also curious about the reception. So you mentioned that your colleagues are thinking that you're a little bit less crazy than they used to, and this got accepted to Virginia Law Review, which sounds like is one of the better ones. Like more broadly, I'm curious. Like, have you found much uptake or much engagement by the legal community with your writing, or more broadly, how's the reception?
Yeah, I think the idea that AI could become very powerful has been entering the Overton window in law, especially over the past, I don't know, say 9 months or something. If I were just to,
Hmm.
when I started writing the draft of this paper, it was like summer of last year. And that was the
Hmm.
point at which I sort of thought, um, this paper is kind of wacky. It's probably outside the Overton window. It might not even get published, but I think it's important. And,
Hmm.
Simon and I should write it anyway. Um, and and at that time, that was informed by places where I had gone and presented prior work, like the AI self improvement paper, um, where I spent most of my time, um, when I would present that paper to law faculties, just trying to convince them to take seriously the idea that we should model AIs of the near future as having goals and having being able to plan,
Hmm.
and act rationally in pursuit of those goals, and being capable of doing stuff that could be dangerous as they pursue those plans. And they were just like not on board even with that premise. And that's like the foundation to, like, that's the
Right.
pre-reading for the paper, right? That's before you even get to any of the arguments in that paper. And so I just found myself doing a lot more conversation about that at that time. And then so we Simon and I wrote this paper, the AI rights paper we've been talking about, um, expecting to have the same reception, just people kind of like
Hmm.
getting off the bus right at the beginning. And it was basically the opposite. I got asked to go present the paper to the faculty workshop at Fordham Law School in fall, and and immediately they wanted to just like dive into the substance of, like, like whether the payoffs in the game theory matrix were right, or whether there's other
Hmm.
versions of the world in which they could look different, and questions about, like, some of the stuff we've talked about, individuating agents for purposes of holding them to their contracts. And it was just such a big shift. I don't know exactly what explained it, except to just say that, every few months, Anthropic or OpenAI or somebody releases an ever more capable agent, and more people use them, and lawyers, just despite being quite small c conservative,
Hmm.
are noticing.
Could it? Sorry, I'm not. as super familiar with the culture of legal academia, could it just be that Fordham University is like unusually AI pilled?
It could be. Data points include not just that, but the editors at the Virginia Law Review being into it. I've given
Hmm.
the paper in a couple of other places too. God, what's the whole list? I was going to say, right after Fordham, I was at Oxford giving the paper, but you're going to say, oh, Oxford's very AI pilled. Although I will
Yeah.
say, I gave the paper to the Oxford Faculty of Business Law, which I think
Sure.
has
Sure.
basically no interaction with like FHI or whatever.
Rest in peace.
Yeah, dearly departed. Uh, yeah, there's others too that I just my brain is not
Okay.
being able to recall. But I would say just in general, like I've talked about this paper in a number of like legal academic settings, and people have been much more interested in talking about like the merits of the idea conditional on the assumptions that I give rather than challenging the
Okay.
assumptions.
And how are you finding? So yeah, I guess you're sort of moving into the existential risk community. Like, how have you found the reception of the paper among the community of people? Among the AI X risk world.
Yeah, pretty. Um, I think it's been reasonably good. I gave an early version of the paper at the Global Priorities Institute's, I think, twice annual conference. And
Hmm.
I think I was probably the only lawyer there. I think it's mostly philosophers and some economists. But yeah, like, it's like
Hmm.
the main AI risk people were there and gave good feedback, but I think we're pretty open to the idea. Um, I guess some of the guys who run Redwood research
Hmm.
have kind of in the past wondered, hey, should we just pay AIs to do stuff for us? And so
Yep.
so they were interested in the kind of more technical analysis we did there. Um, yeah, I would say overall, like my sense is the reaction is pretty good. Where people are skeptical, I think it's mostly people who have very short timelines and think that like super intelligence will be here pretty quickly,
Yep.
and think that basically like some monkeying around with the law is not gonna accomplish anything.
Yeah. I and I guess this actually relates to another question I have. I'm curious, like, are the X risk people in the law academics, are they picking on the same things in the paper, or do they have like, I don't know, do some people focus on some things and other people focus on other things?
So, like among the legal academics who are interested in less X risk,
Hmm.
is there a diversity of views about what's good and bad about the
Uh, I,
paper?
I more mean like, do the X risk people focus on different things than the legal academics? The ones who are not in the intersection.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a difference. Like X risk people tend to be like a lot more interested in um questions like what will bind AI labor at the margin or something like that.
Hmm.
Like they're thinking already in the background. They're like, oh, how much inference compute infrastructure do we need to build for AGI, and
Yep.
how many power plants? And that's kind of in the background of their minds already. Um, and the law people, yeah, they have more law questions, right?
Sure.
So yeah, they immediately hit on questions like, well, isn't stable identity really important to make
Hmm.
property ownership and contract like have the good effects you want, and uh, yeah, stuff like that.
My next question is, so for people who publish in AI, I sort of understand what the theory of change is supposed to be. Like, roughly, people will publish an AI paper indicating some technical fact, and the hope is that other AI researchers learn this fact, and then eventually that when people are building AI, they're they're clued in enough with AI research that they then, uh, you know, that they then incorporate this fact into how they build AIs. Um, for law review articles, it's like, so law professors read them, I
Yeah.
assume. Does this does this somehow feed into what the law actually is? And if so, how?
Yeah. So in a couple, well, there's three things, right? So so one is I do think so first approximation, no one reads law review articles, not even law professors.
Sad.
And I think actually the way of thinking about them is um, a little bit like how you would think about like popular press nonfiction books, which
Mm,
is there's some mix of like reference guide. It's like somebody has an argument, and like, do you need to read the the book year or whatever. Like you can think of like the new Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson book, the Abundance
mm,
book. It's like, do you need to read every page to have like a pretty strong sense of what the argument is
yep.
and the extent to which you disagree with it? Like absolutely not. But it's nice to have the book with the chapters numbered, so you can see, so
Mm,
you can like read the introduction, understand what you think the real weakness is, and then go read the chapter that's about that, and then figure out if it's a good response. um, and so like as reference, as that kind of like reference material, I think they are
mm,
somewhat more widely read, including by courts. Courts will cite law review articles with some regularity, not always for the core proposition of the paper, sometimes for something that's in one of the subsections. And I will
mm,
say there have been cases like in history where like legal academic thinking, like it's hard to point at one particular law review article, but some collection of law review articles have been really influential. So, like, one example is the kind of like turn to economics and consumer welfare as a standard in antitrust was like very much influenced by a bunch of legal thinkers who are mostly putting their ideas out in law reviews in like the 70s and 80s.
right. So should I imagine that there's some like technical law people, and the places those technical law people live? So partly they're litigators. They just have to deal with what the laws actually are.
Yeah,
Partly they're judges who have
yeah,
some leeway to interpret laws, and then partly there's something like, I don't know, agencies who are like, proposing how they should regulate a thing, or maybe they're like whoever writes the model penal code, which is also seems like a crazy situation where, as far as I can tell, a bunch of random lawyers just like get to determine what criminal law is because it's more convenient to let them.
yeah. Well,
But
so
that sort of thing is that sort of thing how I should think of like the impact of law review articles.
yeah, it's like yeah, you've written a piece of technical work that has a mix of technical claims and then
Hmm.
kind of just like higher order gestalt around some set of ideas, right? You can think of the antitrust stuff about this. Like the higher order
Yeah.
gestalt is like it's like you should think about price. Like price should be the thing. And there's very technical arguments in like in like whatever, like Bob Bork's papers about how you should figure out whether there's been a price harm to.
Hmm.
He might not be the best example. I'm not sure actually his paper's that technical, but there are people. Um,
Yeah.
and those ideas kind of diffuse, yeah, through this kind of, think of it as like elite legal apparatus, which is some combination of judges, it's policymakers who go into administrations who want agencies to do different things, and they need to be able to reach, even if your heuristic is as high level as we're the Joe Biden FTC. We want the FTC to be doing more progressive stuff. Well, what
Hmm.
progressive ideas are there out there for doing trade law? Um, and then you pick the ones that have kind of bubbled up in terms of their like popularity and credibility, and then you end up implementing some combination of the gestalt and the technical idea. Uh, yeah, so there's this kind of ecosystem of legal thinking, and then I do think it also spills over into like politics and whatever political discourse more generally. Like you can think of a lot of there's a lot of ideas like right now that people are like regular people are talking more about, that have their their origins in legal academia. Like unitary executive theory is something that kind of
Hmm.
like normal voters have now heard of, but that's like some law professors writing about like separations of powers in, I don't know, probably the 80s and 90s. I'm not totally
Hmm.
sure. Um, yeah, and so it spills over into yeah, broader political, academic discourse as well.
I guess I also want to say, so it sounded like you also maybe wanted to react to this claim I made about the model penal code being a strange institution. I don't know if there's anything you want to say
Oh,
there.
well, so yeah, the model penal code is in some ways this like almost distilled example of what
Hmm.
I'm what I'm talking about, because the model penal code is just a model, right?
Right.
No one has to adopt it. It's just some people who are law professors, who are designated as experts by, I think it's like maybe the criminal law section or the ABA or something. There's
Hmm. The
some
ABA being the American Bar
American
Association,
Bar
the
Association. Yeah, there's
primary
some.
collection of lawyers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but they have no legal power. They're just an institution, and they
Yep.
designate some people who they think are experts, and they say write a penal code. Like, you guys know how the law ought to be. Write it down as a
Hmm.
model, um, and then and then states can adopt it if they want. And then there will be some states who say our penal code is bad. It's
Hmm.
maybe it's not even bad on the merits. Maybe it's too confusing. We don't have that many statutes. It's You have to like know a lot of case law to know what's going to happen. We want to standardize it. Um, we need a policy. And what do they reach for? The model penal code.
Hmm.
Not even because they like think it's correct on the merits top to bottom, but because it's there, right? It's there, and
Right.
it's a
Right.
product of the like whatever elite legal institutions that they rely on to produce
Yeah.
policy.
It's interesting that they picked that and not like another state's penal code, which presumably like you could just pick whatever state you think is you know you like the most and pick their penal code, right?
Yeah, so there's a fair amount of that goes on too, right?
Hmm.
States borrow laws from one another. States borrow federal law for themselves. So
Right.
there's a selection there's a menu of things you can choose. But one of them is like, here's a tome the law professors wrote, and sometimes the tome gets kind of adopted.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. So okay, the
Another good
final.
example. Sorry,
Hmm.
I just thought of one more good example. So maybe you know who Lena Khan is.
Hmm.
Lena Khan is the former chair of the Federal Trade Commission, um, uh, and famously during the Biden administration, which was the administration that appointed her, had an agenda for antitrust in the United States that was like quite different from what came before it. It was less focused
Yep.
myopically on whether monopolies were raising prices, had a more holistic view of when monopoly power could be bad for, say, politics, and was more skeptical of big business kind of in general, kind of in principle, than prior regimes.
Hmm.
And why did that happen? Why was she the chair? She wrote a student note in,
Hmm.
I think Columbia Law Review. I think that was where she went to law school. Um, that just had some of these ideas about how bigness in principle can be bad, and it kind of caught on. And I don't know if Joe Biden thinks that particularly, but it caught on as a kind of progressive idea of what antitrust could be. And so when Joe Biden was looking around for how he can make the government more progressive, well, that was one of the packages on the menu of items you could choose, and that was the one that got chosen. And I think you can trace it directly back to a law review article.
Fair enough. And so I guess is the hope here that somehow like we write enough law review articles about like the potential legal regime for AI. Maybe we get a model civil AI code or something. Is that sort of the eventual theory of change here?
Yeah, I think it's something like, if you think that that AGI is going to happen, whatever time, whatever your timelines are,
Hmm.
um, it just seems pretty plausible that at some point there will come a moment where sort of everyone decides that we need to do something, right? And
Hmm.
there will be many things that you could do. One is you could say, hey, we don't know how to handle these like capable agentic, things that can act on their own behalf over time, and we should just like ban them. We should just like turn them all off or whatever.
Mm,
Or we need to mandate control could be the thing. It's like we'll pass a federal statute that requires like maximal control
mm.
over AIs by the labs that make them, and we'll outlaw open source maybe, and that could be a kind of package of things that happen. And the hope is that then there will be this other thing, which is this kind of, we think of this paper and then the research agenda that we want it to inspire is sort of small L liberalism for
Mm.
AIs. So maybe there'll be this other thing, which is small L liberalism for AIs. It's kind of a package of ideas that's available to implement, and there'll be different arguments about why each of these are good, and we hope that insofar as the arguments we make are the best ones, that will have some effect in making them sort of the package that gets picked up off the shelf.
I guess I want to move on to a bit of just sociology of the law profession. So first of all, so you're writing this paper. It has a bunch of game theory in it. I'm aware that like law and economics is a sort of thing, like kind of a school of thought. Do
Yeah.
you, I don't know, do you sort of come from that tradition, or is it like sort of a coincidence that you're writing a paper with a bunch of game theory?
No, I don't think it's much of a coincidence. So I went to the University of Chicago for law school, which is in many ways like the intellectual home of law and economics. Um, I learned law from a bunch of really great um, people there who are very much oriented around that way of thinking.
Hmm.
Now, it's not true that everyone who teaches at Chicago is like a hardcore law and economics person. Like,
Yeah.
it's a great faculty with a diversity of viewpoints, but yeah, if you wanted to learn how to think about law through the lens of economics, it's not clear you could do that much better than getting a JD from Chicago, which is what I did. So
Okay.
not a coincidence. Although I will say, game theory in the law is even a little bit uh, less common as a methodology, even among people who like do law and economics. Like there definitely are
Yeah.
some books and papers I'd point to where game theory is the way of doing economics, that gets used, but I would say it's a pretty small minority even within law and economics.
Fair enough. So there's a thing I perceive that like maybe I'm wrong. I'm curious how accurate my perception is. So sometimes I run across legal, law people, or like I'll find myself reading a law blog or I'll listen to a podcast. And I think because of my personality, it tends to be like personality and interest and stuff. It tends to be like either they're originalists and I'm reading the Volokh conspiracy, or I'm listening to this podcast called Divided Argument,
Uh-huh.
or it's law and economics and I'm reading like a law and economics person write a thing about how we should think about AI regulation.
Yeah.
Um, and I have some imagination that in my imagination, the originalists and the law and economics people get on get along together, and like they both teach at the University of Chicago, even though it's not obvious that like they all agree on like I've got to imagine that sometimes like originalist interpretation of the Constitution and like law and economics prescriptions for how things should be must often diverge. But and it also seems to me that like it seems like these people are the most likely to be computersy, right? Like
Yeah.
for one, I'm computersy and I run into them, so probably they're computersy as well. Like Volokh conspiracy, like I think Eugene Volokh is like what did some programming stuff before he went into law. Will Bode is like playing around with LLMs on the regular.
Yeah.
Like, am I right to think that this is like kind of a cluster? And if I am right, like, how worrying is it that there's this like one kind of person and they're the only people like really thinking about AI in the legal profession?
So I do think there is a cluster, but I'm not like the explanation could just be coincidence.
Hmm.
So I think if you think back to kind of political conservatism of the like 70s through 90s,
Hmm.
uh there's like Reagan fusion of sort of kind of economic, like free markety type thinking, and then a certain kind of way of thinking about social values, and and in that environment, both law and economics and originalism ended up coded conservative. And I think
Hmm.
it was probably sociologically true also that like the people who did both those things were, you know, politically conservative. Um, and so yes, so some of the most important people who did that kind of stuff clustered at, you know, a particular set of law schools, because whatever, some combination of those law schools are more willing to hire conservatives, or they had hired some people who were open to these methodologies, and those people hired some more people, uh, and so and then to some extent there's like a kind of persistence of of yeah of overlap in those two cultures. I will say I think that's breaking up to a significant degree now.
Yeah, like
Like
for
there,
sure when I read Volok Conspiracy, I guess there's one contributor who seems pretty pro Trump, but the rest of them like don't seem very on board with that.
yeah, and you know, so there's like this whole range of things. There are progressive originalists now who I think are not particularly likely to also be into law and economics.
Hmm.
Law and economics in some ways has been like, I don't know if it's exactly to say it's right to say it's a victim of its own success, but even when I think about like economics departments, you know, academic economics departments, they're basically just doing like high quality empirical social science,
Hmm.
which doesn't have that much of a political valence anymore. And I think to some extent, law and economics is like that now too. It's like, you know, the political valence is wide, and so there's like plenty of people who have kind of a law and economicsy bent who just don't think conservatism is very interesting, and thus because they code originalism as conservative, they don't think it's very interesting. um, so I think to some extent that kind of yeah, like cultural overlap is breaking up. I will also say, if the main originalist, you know, is Will Bode. He's like a teacher of mine. He's
Hmm.
fantastic. I love Will Bode. I think he's pretty weird as I think he's unusual as an originalist in that, um a his like originalist theory is pretty different from like the Scalia
Hmm.
theory. But then also like there's one episode of his podcast with Dan
Hmm.
Epps, which I assume is, yeah, you mentioned
Yep.
divided argument. There's one episode where they have a guy on who is talking about his book on international relations, and at
Oh yeah.
some point Will suggests that like the main reason maybe I don't know if it's the main reason he's an originalist, but one good reason one could be an originalist is that law is basically just serving as a shelling point in like a 300 million person coordination game.
Hmm.
And the most obvious shelling point for constitutional law is the document we wrote down
Hmm.
250 years ago, and that's a really good reason to be an originalist. But it's a super different reason than than you might
Sure.
have if
Sure.
you were a different kind of originalist. Uh,
Yeah. I,
anyway,
I I do get the sense that he's like unusual as an originalist. I guess most originalists aren't like think that Donald Trump is actually the president, for instance, etc. I guess I don't know if he thinks that Donald Trump is or is not the president.
wait, what's the argument that Donald Trump is not currently the president?
Well, okay. So I'm really bad at law, right? Because I've never studied it. But so Will Boyd, he has this big article about
Oh
how
yes,
like the
yeah.
14th
Right.
Amendment says that you're not allowed to have Donald
Yes.
Trump be president, and so I would have naively thought that if the 14th Amendment bars someone from being eligible to be the president, and then there's a presidential election and that person wins, maybe that person isn't really the president. Now, to be fair, I haven't heard him make that additional step. I don't really know if.
Yeah, I'm sure that Will has like a very well considered view about exactly this question,
Hmm.
and I'm not sure what it is. But yes, you're right. Your higher level point where yes, most originalists don't buy the, I think, very originalist and probably
Hmm.
correct ineligibility argument. whereas he does. Yeah, it'd be interesting to find out. Uh,
So so getting back a bit to things that have some chance of interesting people other than me. Um, so it sounds like you think that so I was worried that maybe there was this cluster of originalists and law and economics people, and they were the only law people thinking about computer stuff,
yeah,
and and maybe that was bad because they were kind of homogeneous. And it sounds like you think the originalists and the law and economics people are not so like in tandem anymore, and B, they're they've the political valence of these things is spread out such that it's not even that homogeneous anymore. Is that roughly what you're saying?
at least as compared with the past. Like, I don't know,
Hmm.
probably other law professors would disagree with me. I do think there's an extent to which both these things do still code conservative, although I think there are, like prominent examples to the contrary that everybody knows. I also don't think it's exactly true that those are the only people thinking about like law and AI or law and computer stuff.
Hmm.
Um, there is, a whole mountain of like law review articles on questions like whether AI will be biased along racial or gender or other suspect lines. And as a sociological fact, those people are basically not interested at all in existential risk. I'm not
Hmm.
totally sure how to explain that. I think you could like tell a story about kind of like mood affiliation vis-a-vis big tech, and like if you kind of if your prior is kind of that like in the past social media sort of promised to be this very powerful tool for like liberating autocracies in the Middle East, and like helping people live more fulfilling lives with their friends and loved ones. And what actually happened was it was kind of like just like a soul sucking drag on the world, and the
Hmm.
basic thing that it did was like destroy people's privacy and extract value from like poor and otherwise disadvantaged people. That you will be kind of uh, you know disinclined to believe in AGI.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's the sociological explanation for what's going on. Is it's a cluster of people who kind of have that first set of views, and they're pretty untrusting of claims from industry about what technology is going to do.
Yeah, and I think you have a similar sort of thing in the field of AI where people you have people who are sort of worried that AI will be biased or be deployed in ways that are bad for minoritized groups or whatever, and they tend to um I think the actual thing is that people who are worried about AI X risk and these sorts of people often tend to find each other irritating.
Yeah,
I
there's
think
there's
that's
big
probably
cultural
yeah.
differences.
Although I really hasten to say that I think this divide has like I think you're starting to see more people in the intersection now than you used to.
Yeah,
And I don't
which
know.
to be
I
clear,
think
I
that's
think
great.
is good. Yeah,
Yep.
like I lament this division. I don't think it's good for people who care about X risk,
Hmm.
for influential people to think we're crazy or not worth engaging with. I think the other way around too. I think that people who are really worried about um, AI discrimination or privacy harms from AI or whatever could benefit a lot from engaging with people who are interested in X risk, because in many ways the in many ways the concerns like overlap um, from a
Yeah.
technical and legal perspective.
So on that conciliatory note, uh, I've used a ton of your time. Thanks very much for being here. Before we wrap up, if people listen to this episode and they're interested in following your work, what should they do?
Yeah, so there's three places they could look depending on on what they're most interested in. So you can find my academic work and actually most of my writing at my personal website, which is Peter N. Um, N is in Nancy, Salib, SALIB.com. If you want more digestible pieces of writing than 88 pages of law review, I'm also an editor at Lawfare, and you can find all of my shorter form works, or not all, but all of my shorter form Lawfare works there, many of which sort of touch on or summarize my longer academic work. And then the last thing I mentioned at some point during our talk that I really think that like the field of law and AI safety is you know neglected and potentially high impact. I think it's a really good idea to try and build a community of legal scholars who are interested in working on these questions, who want to build out all these parts of the research agenda that I gestured at today, or who think like, I don't know, what I've talked about today is totally wrong and there's like much better way to think about law as we approach AGI. And so I co-run something called the Center for Law and AI Risk. And we are working to build that community in legal academia specifically. We think that there is a lot of potential upside to having this kind of blue sky thinking, like laying the intellectual foundations for how law should govern AI to reduce existential and catastrophic risk. So please do go to claire-ai.org and join us for a future event.
All right. Well, Peter, thanks very much for joining me for the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's been a real treat.
This episode is edited by Kate Brunotz, and Amber Dornace helped with transcription. The opening and closing themes are by Jack Garrett. This episode was recorded at FAR Labs. Financial support for the episode was provided by the Long-Term Future Fund, along with patrons such as Alexei Malafiev. You can become a patron yourself at patreon.com/AXRpodcast, or give a one-off donation at ko-fi.com/AXRpodcast. That's ko-fi.com/AXRpodcast. Finally, if you have any feedback about the podcast, you can fill out a super short survey at axrp.fyi. Just 2 questions.